At the luxurious Sapphire Bay Resort, Miguel silently endures the daily torment of arrogant tourists. They mock his broken English, treating him like a simpleton as he serves their drinks with a forced smile. Little do these entitled guests know, Miguel harbors a shocking secret that's about to turn their world upside down. For months, Miguel has played the role of a humble waiter, but beneath his meek exterior lies a brilliant mind. He's not just any server, he's a renowned linguistics professor conducting undercover research on tourist local interactions. As the insults and humiliation mount, Miguel's patience wears thin. When a particularly nasty group of guests pushes him too far, Miguel snaps. In a moment that leaves everyone speechless, he unleashes his perfect English and razor-sharp wit, exposing his true identity. The fallout is immediate and intense. Miguel faces losing his job, ethical scrutiny from academic peers, and a media frenzy that threatens to derail his entire life's work. Now Miguel must navigate newfound fame, unexpected opportunities, and the consequences of his deception. As word spreads, he grapples with guilt over misleading his co-workers and the pressure to capitalize on his viral moment. Will this incident destroy everything he's worked for, or can Miguel turn it into a powerful lesson on prejudice and cultural understanding? Before we dive into this gripping tale of comeuppance and redemption, buckle up, get ready, and subscribe for a special surprise tomorrow. The sun-drenched beaches of Sapphire Bay stretched out before the sprawling luxury resort, its pristine white buildings gleaming against the azure sky. Tourists lounged by infinity pools, sipping colorful cocktails and basking in the Caribbean warmth. Among them moved the resort staff, efficient and unobtrusive in their crisp uniforms. Miguel Alvarez weaved through the crowd, a tray of drinks balanced expertly on one hand. His movements were fluid and practiced, his expression neutral as he approached a group of sunbathing guests. "Your drinks, please," he said, his accent thick as he carefully placed each glass on the table beside them. A woman with oversized sunglasses and a designer swimsuit looked up at him, her nose wrinkling slightly. "Took you long enough. Don't you people know the meaning of prompt service?" Miguel's face remained impassive. "My apologies, madam. Is there anything else I can get for you?" The woman's companion, a middle-aged man with a protruding belly, snorted. "Yeah, how about some English lessons? Might help you understand our orders better next time." Laughter rippled through the group as Miguel nodded silently and retreated. It was a scene that played out countless times each day, the casual cruelty of privileged guests who saw the staff as little more than furniture. As he made his way back to the bar, Miguel caught the sympathetic eye of Maria, another server who had witnessed the exchange. "Don't let them get to you, Miguel," she murmured in Spanish as he passed. "They're not worth it." Miguel gave her a small smile but said nothing. He had long since learned that engaging only made things worse. Instead, he focused on his next task, mentally reviewing the long list of drink orders he needed to prepare. The resort's main bar was a marvel of modern design, all sleek lines and polished surfaces. Behind it, bottles of premium liquor gleamed like jewels. Miguel moved with practiced efficiency, his hands a blur as he mixed cocktails and poured wine. To the casual observer, he appeared fully absorbed in his work. Just another hard-working but unremarkable employee. Yet there was more to Miguel than met the eye. As he worked, his mind was busy cataloging each interaction, analyzing the linguistic patterns and cultural assumptions at play. Every snide comment, every patronizing tone, every mangled attempt at Spanish, all of it was mental fodder for a purpose beyond simply earning a paycheck. As the afternoon wore on, Miguel found himself assigned to the beachfront bar, a popular spot for guests to gather and watch the sunset. He had just finished setting up when a boisterous group approached, their voices carrying across the sand. "Hey, amigo!" called out a man in his 30s, his accent a caricature of what he thought Spanish should sound like. "5 margaritas, pronto, and make them strong, yeah?" Miguel nodded, reaching for the tequila. "Of course, sir. Would you prefer them frozen or on the rocks?" The man blinked, clearly not expecting such a question. "Rocks, I guess. Just hurry it up. We're dying of thirst here." As Miguel began preparing the drinks, he could hear the group's conversation, laden with stereotypes and misconceptions about the local culture. They spoke loudly, seemingly unconcerned that he or anyone else might understand or take offense. "I swear, these people would be lost without tourism," one woman remarked. "It's like they don't know how to do anything else," a friend agreed. "But hey, at least they're good at carrying our bags and mixing our drinks, right? More laughter. Miguel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as he finished the last margarita and arranged them on a tray. He turned, plastering on a smile as he approached the group. "Your margaritas, ladies and gentlemen," he said, distributing the glasses. "Please enjoy." The first man took a sip and grimaced. "Whoa, these are strong. Guess you guys know how to party after all, huh?" Miguel's smile never wavered. "We aim to please, sir. Is there anything else I can get for you?" "No," the man waved him off, already turning back to his friends. "Just keep them coming, Speedy Gonzalez." As Miguel walked away, he could feel a familiar tension building in his chest. It was a mixture of anger, frustration, and something deeper, a sense of purpose that burned beneath the surface of his carefully constructed facade. Later that evening, after his shift had ended, Miguel made his way to his small room in the staff quarters. It was a far cry from the luxurious suites enjoyed by the guests, but it served its purpose. He locked the door behind him and let out a long, weary sigh. Only then did he allow his posture to change, straightening up as he shed the subservient demeanor he wore all day. He moved to the desk tucked in the corner of the room, opening a laptop that looked out of place among his few belongings. The screen came to life, revealing a half-written academic paper. The title at the top read, "Linguistic Imperialism in Tourist Local Interactions, a Case Study in Power Dynamics and Cultural Erasure." Miguel's fingers flew across the keyboard as he began to type, his earlier experiences transforming into data, points, and analysis. Gone was the halting English of the resort waiter, replaced by the eloquent prose of a seasoned academic. As he worked, Miguel's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it, seeing a name that would have surprised anyone who knew him only as a resort employee. Dr. Emilia Rodriguez, Department Chair, Linguistics Department, University of Havana. The message was brief. "Progress report due next week. Don't forget our meeting on Thursday. Stay strong, Miguel. Your work is important." Miguel allowed himself a small smile as he typed out a response, his written English as perfect as any native speaker's. He then returned to his paper, losing himself in the work that gave meaning to his daily humiliation. Hours passed, the eye, sounds of the resort's nightlife drifting through his window. Eventually, Miguel saved his work and closed the laptop. He moved to the small bathroom, splashing water on his face as he stared at his reflection in the mirror. The man looking back at him was a far cry from the meek waiter the resort guests knew. His eyes were sharp and intelligent, his posture confident. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine revealing his true identity to those who had mocked him earlier that day. But no, it wasn't time yet. His study wasn't complete, and there was still so much data to gather. Miguel took a deep breath, watching as he consciously transformed back into the persona he presented to the world. Shoulders slightly hunched, eyes downcast, the weight of assumed inferiority settling over him like a familiar blanket. Tomorrow would bring more of the same, more insults, more condescension, more struggle to bite his tongue in the face of ignorance and prejudice. But Miguel knew it was all serving a greater purpose. One day, his work would shed light on the insidious nature of linguistic and cultural oppression in the tourism industry. One day, he would have his say. For now, though, he had a role to play. Miguel set his alarm, ready to greet another day of pretending to be less than he was, all in the name of academic rigor and social justice. As he drifted off to sleep, Miguel couldn't help but wonder how much longer he could maintain this charade. Little did he know that events were already in motion that would soon force his hand, bringing his two worlds into explosive collision. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the Caribbean sun already beating down on the resort as Miguel made his way to the staff entrance. He nodded to the security guard, slipping into the carefully choreographed dance of the hospitality industry. In the locker room, he changed into his crisp uniform, each movement deliberate as he assumed the role he'd been playing for months. As he emerged into the bustling kitchen, Miguel caught snippets of excited chatter among his co-workers. "Did you hear?" Maria whispered as she passed him, balancing a tray of fresh fruit. "The Blackwell party is arriving today. Management's in a frenzy." Miguel raised an eyebrow, feigning only mild interest. "Blackwell, should I know the name?" Maria rolled her eyes. "Come on, Miguel. The Blackwells? As in Blackwell Industries? They're practically royalty in the tech world. Rumor has it there. Before Miguel could respond, their supervisor appeared, clapping his hands for attention. Listen up, everyone. The Blackwell Group will be occupying the entire East Wing. I want everything perfect, understand? They're VVIPs, and we need to show them the very best of Sapphire Bay. As the staff dispersed to their assigned tasks, Miguel felt a familiar twinge of anticipation. High-profile guests often provided the richest data for his research, their entitlement and expectations, creating a perfect microcosm of the power dynamics he was studying. The morning passed in a flurry of activity as the resort prepared for the Blackwell's arrival. Miguel found himself assigned to the exclusive beachfront cabanas, meticulously arranging towels and stocking minibars. As he worked, he couldn't help but overhear the excited gossip of nearby guests. "I heard they're bringing their own chef," one woman said, her voice carrying across the sand. "Can you imagine? As if the food here isn't good enough for them." Her companion snorted. "Well, what do you expect? When you're worth billions, you can do whatever you want." Miguel filed away, these comments mentally noting the mixture of awe and resentment in their tones. It was a common theme in his research, the complex relationship between wealth, status, and perceived cultural superiority. As the afternoon wore on, a ripple of excitement passed through the resort. A fleet of sleek black SUVs pulled up to the main entrance, disgorging a stream of well-dressed individuals. At their center was a man Miguel recognized immediately from countless magazine covers and news broadcasts, Jonathan Blackwell himself, tech mogul and self-styled visionary. From his position by the cabanas, Miguel watched as Blackwell and his entourage were ushered into the lobby. The man's bearing exuded confidence and authority, his gaze sweeping over the resort as if assessing a new acquisition. Trailing behind him was a group of younger individuals, all impeccably dressed and radiating an air of importance. "Those must be the rising stars," murmured a nearby server. "I heard Blackwell's looking to shake up his executive team. This retreat is supposed to be some kind of test for them." Miguel nodded absently, his mind already racing with the possibilities this situation presented for his research. A group of ambitious young executives, all vying for position under the watchful eye of their billionaire boss, was a perfect pressure cooker for the kind of behavior he was studying. As the day progressed, Miguel found himself increasingly in contact with members of the Blackwell Group. They spread out across the resort, some heading to the golf course, others to the spa or the private beach. Everywhere they went, they left a wake of demands and barely concealed impatience. "Hey, you," called out a young man, snapping his fingers at Miguel as he passed by the pool. "We need more champagne over here, and make it snappy. We're celebrating." Miguel hurried over, noting the group of four, all in their late 20s or early 30s. They lounged on premium sunbeds, designer sunglasses hiding their eyes but not their smirks. "Of course, sir," Miguel said, adopting the subservient tone that had become second nature. "Which champagne would you prefer? We have several excellent options." The young man waved his hand dismissively. "Whatever's most expensive, Mr. Blackwell's footing the bill, so why not indulge, right?" As Miguel turned to fetch the champagne, he heard one of the women in the group giggle. "God, can you imagine working in a place like this? I'd die of boredom." "Oh, I don't know," another replied. "Seems like a pretty cushy gig to me. Sun, sand, and all the leftovers you can eat. Probably beats whatever they'd be doing back in their villages." Miguel's jaw clenched, but he kept his face carefully neutral as he returned with the champagne. As he poured, he could feel their eyes on him, assessing and dismissive all at once. "So, amigo," said the first young man, his tone dripping with false camaraderie. "You must meet a lot of interesting people working here, huh? Any hot gossip you can share about the guests?" Miguel smiled blandly. "I'm sorry, sir, but we respect our guests' privacy. Is there anything else I can get for you?" The man's face hardened slightly. "Come on, don't be like that. We're all friends. Here, right? I'll make it worth your while." He pulled out a wallet, making a show of extracting a large bill. For a moment, Miguel was tempted to break character, to show these arrogant young executives just how wrong their assumptions were. But he held back, reminding himself of the importance of his work. "Thank you, sir, but I'm afraid I can't discuss other guests. Please enjoy your champagne." As he walked away, he could hear them muttering among themselves. "Ungrateful," one said. "You tried to be nice, and they just shut you down." "Enough to gossip," another added with a laugh. Miguel let their words wash over him, each insult and assumption another data point in his growing study. He made a mental note to record this interaction in detail later, seeing in it a perfect example of the casual dehumanization that permeated tourist local interactions. was. As evening approached, Miguel found himself assigned to the resort's most exclusive restaurant, where the Blackwell Group had reserved the entire space for a private dinner. He moved efficiently between tables, refilling water glasses and clearing plates, all while keeping his ears open. The conversation flowed freely, lubricated by expensive wine and the heady atmosphere of competition. Miguel picked up fragments of discussion about mergers, acquisitions, and technological innovations that would have been front-page news in the business world. But it was the more personal comments that truly caught his attention. As the night wore on and inhibitions lowered, the true nature of many in the group began to show. "I'm telling you," one man said, gesturing with his wineglass, "the key to success in emerging markets is to make them think they need us, create the problem, then sell them the solution." His companion nodded sagely. "Exactly. These developing countries are gold mines if you know how to exploit them. All those untapped resources, all that cheap labor, just waiting for someone with vision to come along." Miguel's hand trembled slightly as he poured more wine, the casual cruelty of their worldview striking him to his core. He wanted nothing more than to challenge them, to force them to confront the human cost of their vision. But he remained silent, playing his role to perfection. As the night wore on, the group became increasingly boisterous. Demands for more drinks, more food, more entertainment flew fast and thick. Miguel and the other staff ran themselves ragged trying to keep up, all while enduring a constant stream of condescension and casual racism. "You know," slurred one young woman, leaning in conspiratorially to her friends, "I almost feel bad for them. Imagine this being the highlight of your life, serving people like us. It's sad, really." Her companion snorted. "Oh, please, they should be grateful. We're probably single-handedly keeping this country's economy afloat." It was well past midnight when the party finally began to break up. As Miguel helped to clear the devastation left behind, he overheard Jonathan Blackwell addressing his group. "All right, people, I hope you all enjoyed yourselves tonight. But remember, this isn't just a vacation. I'll be watching all of you closely over the next few days. Impress me, and your future at Blackwell Industries will be very bright indeed. Disappoint me, and well, let's just say there are plenty of hungry young talents eager to take your place." As the group dispersed, Miguel couldn't help but notice the calculating looks that passed between them. It was clear that beneath the veneer of camaraderie, a fierce competition was brewing. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, Miguel was able to return to his room. Exhausted physically but mentally wired, he immediately went to his laptop. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he transcribed every interaction, every overheard comment, every nuance of behavior he had observed. As he wrote, a plan began to form in his mind. The Blackwell Group presented a unique opportunity, a concentrated sample of the very attitudes and behaviors his research aimed to expose. But to truly capture the depth of the issue, he would need to get closer, to engage with them more directly. Miguel leaned back, considering the risks. To get the data he needed, he might have to push the boundaries of his assumed persona. It was dangerous, the threat of exposure ever present, but the potential insights were too valuable to ignore. Decision made, Miguel set about planning his approach. He would need to be careful, to walk the fine line between engaged service and subservient invisibility. One wrong move, one slip of his carefully constructed mask, and everything he had worked for could come crashing down. As he finally prepared for bed, the first rays of dawn creeping through his window, Miguel felt a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. The next few days would be crucial, not just for his research, but potentially for his entire academic career. Little did he know that the events set in motion by the Blackwell Group's arrival would soon force him to confront not just his research subjects, but his own deepest convictions about identity, integrity, and the true cost of remaining silent in the face of injustice. The next few days at Sapphire Bay Resort unfolded like a pressure cooker slowly building steam. The Blackwell Group's presence permeated every corner of the luxurious property, their demands and expectations creating an atmosphere of constant tension, a gold mine of research material and an increasingly challenging challenging test of his resolve. On the third morning after their arrival, Miguel found himself assigned to the private beach area, reserved exclusively for the Blackwell party. The sun had barely risen, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, as he meticulously arranged lounge chairs and set up a lavish breakfast buffet. Even as he worked, his keen ears picked up the approach of voices, recognizing the now familiar tones of Jonathan Blackwell's inner circle. "I'm telling you, Sandra, you need to step up your game," came a male voice, sharp with ambition. "Blackwell's been watching us all like a hawk, and I heard he was particularly impressed with Chen's presentation yesterday." "Please, Tyler," Sandra scoffed, her designer sandals crunching on the sand. "Chen might have the numbers, but I've got the vision. Blackwell Industries needs someone who can see the big picture, not just crunch data." Miguel kept his head down as the group approached, pretending to be absorbed in arranging fruit on a platter. From the corner of his eye, he saw Tyler, a tall man with slicked back hair, gesturing expansively. "Vision is great, but you know what really matters? Results. And speaking of results, where's that waiter? I need my morning coffee, pronto." Straightening up, Miguel adopted his most servile expression. "Good morning, sir, madam. How may I assist you?" Tyler barely glanced at him. "Finally, I'll have a double espresso and make it snappy. Some of us have important work to do today." "Of course, sir. And for you, madam." Miguel turned to Sandra, noting the calculating look in her eyes as she surveyed the breakfast spread. "I'll have a green smoothie." "No." Sandra paused, her lips curving into a smirk. "Make that 2 smoothies. One for me and one for our friend Chen over there. I hear he's watching his figure." Miguel nodded, keeping his face carefully neutral, even as he mentally noted the subtle power play. "Right away, madam. Would you like anything else with your breakfast?" Before Sandra could answer, a new voice joined the conversation. "Oh, don't bother asking them, amigo. They wouldn't know good food if it bit them on their overpaid asses." The newcomer was a younger man, perhaps in his early 30s, with an easy grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Miguel recognized him as Alex Reeves, one of the rising stars in Blackwell's tech division. "Laugh it up, Reeves," Tyler growled. "We'll see who's laughing when Blackwell makes his decision." Alex's grin widened. "Oh, don't be like that, Ty. I'm just trying to expand your culinary horizons." He turned to Miguel, switching to heavily accented Spanish. "Hola, amigo. Das para el desayuno." Miguel felt a familiar twinge of irritation at the mangled pronunciation, but kept his tone respectful as he answered in English. "Our chef's special this morning is a traditional Caribbean breakfast bowl, sir. It's quite popular with our guests." "Sounds perfect." Alex clapped his hands together. "I'll have that, and keep the coffee coming. Some of us need to stay sharp for the big presentation today." As Miguel moved to prepare their orders, he could feel the tension radiating from the group. It was clear that the competition for Blackwell's favor was reaching a fever pitch, and the strain was beginning to show in their interactions. Throughout the morning, Miguel found himself constantly at the beck and call of the Blackwell group. Every interaction provided new insights for his research, from the casual dismissal of local customs to the thinly veiled threats exchanged between rivals. He recorded it all mentally, looking forward to the moment he could transfer his observations to his growing database. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the beach began to fill with more members of the Blackwell entourage. Miguel weaved between them, refilling drinks and fielding increasingly demanding requests. The combination of high stakes, tropical heat, and free-flowing alcohol was creating a volatile atmosphere. "Hey, you!" A sharp voice cut through the buzz of conversation. Miguel turned to see a red-faced man gesturing angrily from his lounge chair. "I asked for ice 10 minutes ago. What's the holdup?" Miguel hurried over, apologizing profusely. "I'm so sorry, sir. I'll fetch that for you right away." The man's companion, a woman with meticulously styled hair, rolled her eyes. "Don't bother apologizing to them, Derek. It's not like they understand anyway." Derek grunted in agreement. "You'd think with all the money Blackwell's dropping on this place, they could hire some competent staff. Hey, you understand that? Competent." He enunciated the word slowly, as if speaking to a child. Miguel felt his jaw clench, the familiar urge to reveal his true self bubbling just beneath the surface. But he forced a placid smile, nodding as if in vague comprehension. "Yes, sir." As he turned to leave, he heard the woman mutter, "God, it's like talking to a brick wall. No wonder these countries never get anywhere." The comment stung, but Miguel channeled his frustration into his work. Every insult, every dismissive gesture, every assumption of inferiority was fuel for his research. He was building a comprehensive picture of the subtle and not so subtle ways in which language and cultural assumptions reinforced power imbalances. As the day wore on, the Blackwell Group's behavior became increasingly erratic. The combination of sun, alcohol, and competitive pressure was taking its toll. Miguel observed heated arguments breaking out over seemingly trivial matters, with long, simmering rivalries bubbling to the surface. "I'm telling you, Chen's algorithms are flawed," Tyler was saying loudly to anyone who would listen. "His projections are based on outdated models. If Blackwell goes with his plan, we'll be looking at a major setback within 6 months." Chen, a quiet man who had largely kept to himself, finally spoke up. "My models have been peer-reviewed and tested in real-world applications, Tyler. Perhaps if you spent less time criticizing others and more time on your own work, you wouldn't be so worried about your position." The tension in the air was palpable as Tyler rose from his chair, fists clenched. "You want to say that again, you little gentleman?" Alex's voice cut through the confrontation. "Let's not forget where we are. We're supposed to be a team, remember? Now, who's up for another round of margaritas?" The potential fight diffused, but Miguel could see that the underlying issues remained unresolved. He made a mental note to pay special attention to the dynamics between Tyler and Chen in the coming days. As the afternoon stretched into evening, Miguel found himself assigned to the resort's main bar, where the Blackwell Group had gathered for pre-dinner drinks. The atmosphere was charged with a mixture of forced joviality and simmering resentment. "Miguel, my man," Alex called out, his speech slightly slurred. "Another round for everyone. We're celebrating." Sandra raised an eyebrow. "Celebrating what?" "Exactly. Last I checked, Blackwell hasn't made any decisions yet." Alex grinned, throwing an arm around her shoulders. "Why, we're celebrating the fact that we're all here in paradise, living the dream. Isn't that right, Miguel?" Miguel nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "Of course, sir. Shall I bring the usual for everyone?" As he moved to prepare the drinks, he could hear the conversation continuing behind him. "You know," Chen said quietly, "perhaps we should consider moderating our consumption. We all have important presentations tomorrow." Tyler snorted. "Speak for yourself, Chen. Some of us can handle our liquor. Besides, Blackwell appreciates someone who can work hard and play hard." Miguel returned with the tray of drinks, distributing them carefully. As he handed Alex his cocktail, the man grabbed his arm, pulling him closer. "Tell me, amigo," Alex said, his breath heavy with alcohol. "What's your secret? How do you stay so calm with all us demanding gringos around?" Miguel felt a moment of panic, worried that his careful facade was slipping, but he quickly recovered, adopting a look of mild confusion. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't understand." Alex laughed, releasing him. "Of course you don't. That's probably for the best, isn't it? Ignorance is bliss and all that." As Miguel stepped back, he caught Sandra watching him with a thoughtful expression. For a moment, he worried that she had seen something in his reaction, some hint of his true self. But then she turned away, engaging Chen in a discussion about market projections. The night wore on, and the Blackwell Group showed no signs of slowing down. Miguel found himself running back and forth, fetching increasingly elaborate drink orders and mediating minor disputes. By the time last call was announced, he was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. As the group finally began to disperse, Miguel overheard a snippet of conversation that made him pause. "I'm telling you," Tyler was saying in a low voice, "I've got a plan that's going to blow Blackwell away. It's a little, shall we say, ethically grey, but the profits will be astronomical." Sandra leaned in, intrigued. "Oh, do tell." Tyler glanced around, then lowered his voice further. "Let's just say it involves exploiting a loophole in some developing nation's labor laws. We'll need to keep it quiet, of course, but if we play our cards right, we're looking at billions in savings." Miguel felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just casual racism or cultural insensitivity. This was a blatant plan to exploit vulnerable populations. He itched to confront them, to expose their scheme, but he knew he couldn't risk blowing his cover. As he finished cleaning up the bar, Miguel's mind raced. The information he had overheard, not just for his research, but for real people who could be harmed by Tyler's plan. He knew he needed to document everything carefully, but he also felt a growing sense of responsibility to do something more. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, Miguel made his way back to his small room. Despite his exhaustion, he immediately opened his laptop, fingers flying flying across the keyboard as he recorded every detail of the day's events. As he wrote, he found himself facing a moral dilemma. His research was important, potentially groundbreaking, in its examination of linguistic and cultural power dynamics in the tourism industry. But was it worth staying silent in the face of the kind of exploitation Tyler had hinted at? Miguel leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. He had come to Sapphire Bay Resort to study the subtle ways in which language and cultural assumptions reinforced inequality. But now he found himself confronted with a much more overt form of exploitation. For the first time since beginning his undercover work, Miguel seriously considered breaking his cover. He could expose Tyler's plan, alert the authorities, do something to prevent the harm that was being planned in boardrooms and on sun-soaked beaches. But the academic in him hesitated. If he revealed himself now, all of his work would be compromised. The months of careful observation and data collection would be rendered useless, and without hard evidence, would anyone even believe the word of a waiter against a powerful executive? As the first rays of dawn began to creep through his window, Miguel made a decision. He would continue his charade for now, but he would also redouble his efforts to gather concrete evidence of any wrongdoing. If he could document Tyler's plan in detail, he might be able to expose it without compromising his research. With this resolution in mind, Miguel finally allowed himself to sleep, but his dreams were troubled, filled with images of faceless corporations looming over helpless villages, and of himself, standing silently by as it all unfolded. The next morning came all too soon, and Miguel dragged himself out of bed, his body protesting after too little rest. As he donned his uniform, he steeled himself for another day of pretense and careful observation. But as he stepped out into the bright Caribbean morning, Miguel couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally changed. The stakes had been raised, and he knew that the coming days would test not just his research skills, but his very principles. Little did he know that events were already in motion that would soon force his hand, bringing his two worlds into a collision that would change everything. The next few days at Sapphire Bay Resort unfolded like a pressure cooker slowly building steam. The Blackwell Group's presence permeated every corner of the luxurious property, their demands and expectations creating an atmosphere of constant tension among the staff. For Miguel, it was both a gold mine of research material and an increasingly challenging test of his resolve. On the third morning after their arrival, Miguel found himself assigned to the private beach area reserved exclusively for the Blackwell party. The sun had barely risen, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, as he meticulously arranged lounge chairs and set up a lavish breakfast buffet. Even as he worked, his keen ears picked up the approach of voices, recognizing the now familiar tones of Jonathan Blackwell's inner circle. "I'm telling you, Sandra, you need to step up your game," came a male voice, sharp with ambition. "Blackwell's been watching us all like a hawk, and I heard he was particularly impressed with Chen's presentation yesterday." "Please, Tyler," Sandra scoffed, her designer sandals crunching on the sand. "Chen might have the numbers, but I've got the vision. Blackwell Industries needs someone who can see the big picture, not just crunch data." Miguel kept his head down as the group approached, pretending to be absorbed in arranging fruit on a platter. From the corner of his eye, he saw Tyler, a tall man with slicked back hair, gesturing expansively. "Vision is great, but you know what really matters? Results. And speaking of results, where's that waiter? I need my morning coffee pronto." Straightening up, Miguel adopted his most servile expression. "Good morning, sir, madam. How may I assist you?" Tyler barely glanced at him. "Finally, I'll have a double espresso and make it snappy. Some of us have important work to do today." "Of course, sir. And for you, madam." Miguel turned to Sandra, noting the calculating look in her eyes as she surveyed the breakfast spread. I'll have a green smoothie." "No." Sandra paused, her lips curving into a smirk. "Make that 2 smoothies, one for me and one for our friend Chen over there. I hear he's watching his figure." Miguel nodded, keeping his face carefully neutral, even as he meant, "Right away, madam. Would you like anything else with your breakfast?" Before Sandra could answer, a new voice joined the conversation. "Oh, don't bother asking them, amigo. They wouldn't know good food if it bit them on their overpaid asses." The newcomer was a younger man, perhaps in his early 30s, with an easy grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Miguel recognized him as Alex Reeves, one of the rising stars in Blackwell's tech division. "Laugh it up, Reeves," Tyler growled. "We'll see who's laughing when Blackwell makes his decision." Alex's grin widened. "Oh, don't be like that, Ty. I'm just trying to expand your culinary horizons. He turned to Miguel, switching to heavily accented Spanish. Hola, amigo, ¿qué recomiendas para el desayuno? Miguel felt a familiar twinge of irritation at the mangled pronunciation, but kept his tone respectful as he answered in English. Our chef's special this morning is a traditional Caribbean breakfast bowl, sir. It's quite popular with our guests. Sounds perfect. Alex clapped his hands together. I'll have that and keep the coffee coming. Some of us need to stay sharp for the big presentation today. As Miguel moved to prepare their orders, he could feel the tension radiating from the group. It was clear that the competition for Blackwell's favor was reaching a fever pitch, and the strain was beginning to show in their interactions. Throughout the morning, Miguel found himself constantly at the beck and call of the Blackwell group. Every interaction provided new insights for his research, from the casual dismissal of local customs to the thinly veiled threats exchanged between rivals. He recorded it all mentally, looking forward to the moment he could transfer his observations to his growing database. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the beach began to fill with more members of the Blackwell entourage. Miguel weaved between them, refilling drinks and fielding increasingly demanding requests. The combination of high stakes, tropical heat, and free-flowing alcohol was creating a volatile atmosphere. Hey you! A sharp voice cut through the buzz of conversation. Miguel turned to see a red-faced man gesturing angrily from his lounge chair. I asked for ice 10 minutes ago. What's the holdup? Miguel hurried over, apologizing profusely. I'm so sorry, sir. I'll fetch that for you right away. The man's companion, a woman with meticulously styled hair, rolled her eyes. Don't bother apologizing to them, Derek. It's not like they understand anyway. Derek grunted in agreement. You'd think with all the money Blackwell's dropping on this place, they could hire some competent staff. Hey, you understand that? Competent. He enunciated the words slowly, as if speaking to a child. Miguel felt his jaw clench, the familiar urge to reveal his true self bubbling just beneath the surface. But he forced a placid smile, nodding as if in vague comprehension. Yes, sir. Ice coming right away, sir. As he turned to leave, he heard the woman mutter, God, it's like talking to a brick wall. No wonder these countries never get anywhere. The comment stung, but Miguel channeled his frustration into his work. Every insult, every dismissive gesture, every assumption of inferiority was fuel for his research. He was building a comprehensive picture of the subtle and not so subtle ways in which language and cultural assumptions reinforced power imbalances. As the day wore on, the Blackwell group's behavior became increasingly erratic. The combination of sun, alcohol, and competitive pressure was taking its toll. Miguel observed heated arguments breaking out over seemingly trivial matters, with long simmering rivalries bubbling to the surface. I'm telling you, Chen's algorithms are flawed, Tyler was saying loudly to anyone who would listen. His projections are based on outdated models. If Blackwell goes with his plan, we'll be looking at a major setback within 6 months. Chen, a quiet man who had largely kept to himself, finally spoke up. My models have been peer-reviewed and tested in real-world applications, Tyler. Perhaps if you spent less time criticizing others and more time on your own work, you wouldn't be so worried about your position. The tension in the air was palpable as Tyler rose from his chair, fists clenched. You want to say that again, you little gentleman? Alex's voice cut through the confrontation. Let's not forget where we are. We're supposed to be a team, remember? Now who's up for another round of margaritas? The potential fight diffused, but Miguel could see that the underlying issues remained unresolved. He made a mental note to pay special attention to the dynamics between Tyler and Chen in the coming days. As the afternoon stretched into evening, Miguel found himself assigned to the resort's main bar, where the Blackwell group had gathered for pre-dinner drinks. The atmosphere was charged with a simmering resentment. Miguel, my man, Alex called out, his speech slightly slurred. Another round for everyone. We're celebrating. Sandra raised an eyebrow. Celebrating what exactly? Last I checked, Blackwell hasn't made any decisions yet, Alex grinned, throwing an arm around her shoulders. Why, we're celebrating the fact that we're all here in paradise living the dream. Isn't that right, Miguel? Miguel nodded, keeping his expression neutral. Of course, sir. Shall I bring the usual for everyone? As he moved to prepare the drinks, he could hear the conversation continuing behind him. You know, Chen said quietly, perhaps we should consider moderating our consumption. We all have important presentations tomorrow. Tyler snorted. Speak for yourself, Chen. Some of us can handle our liquor. Besides, Blackwell appreciates someone who can work hard and play hard. Miguel returned with a tray of drinks, distributing them carefully. As he handed Alex his cocktail, the man grabbed his arm, pulling him closer. "Tell me, amigo," Alex said, his breath heavy with alcohol. "What's your secret, huh? How do you stay so calm with all us demanding gringos around?" Miguel felt a moment of panic, worried that his careful facade was slipping, but he quickly recovered, adopting a look of mild confusion. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't understand." Alex laughed, releasing him. "Of course you don't. That's probably for the best, isn't it? Ignorance is bliss and all that." As Miguel stepped back, he caught Sandra watching him with a thoughtful expression. For a moment, he worried that she had seen something in his reaction, some hint of his true self, but then she turned away, engaging Chen in a discussion about market projections. The night wore on, and the Blackwell Group showed no signs of slowing down. Miguel found himself running back and forth, fetching increasingly elaborate drink orders and mediating minor disputes. By the time last call was announced, he was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. As the group finally began to disperse, Miguel overheard a snippet of conversation that made him pause. "I'm telling you," Tyler was saying in a low voice, "I've got a plan that's going to blow Blackwell away. It's a little, shall we say, ethically grey, but the profits will be astronomical." Sandra leaned in, intrigued. "Do tell." Tyler glanced around, then lowered his voice further. "Let's just say it involves exploiting a loophole in some developing nation's labor laws. We'll need to keep it quiet, of course, but if we play our cards right, we're looking at billions in savings." Miguel felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just casual racism or cultural insensitivity. This was a blatant plan to exploit vulnerable populations. He itched to confront them, to expose their scheme, but he knew he couldn't risk blowing his cover as he finished cleaning up. The bar, Miguel's mind raced. The information he had overheard could have serious implications, not just for his research, but for real people who could be harmed by Tyler's plan. He knew he needed to document everything carefully, but he also felt a growing sense of responsibility to do something more. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, Miguel made his way back to his small room. Despite his exhaustion, he immediately opened his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard as he recorded every detail of the day's events. As he wrote, he found himself facing a moral dilemma. His research was important, potentially groundbreaking, in its examination of linguistic and cultural power dynamics in the tourism industry. But was it worth staying silent in the face of the kind of exploitation Tyler had hinted at? Miguel leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. He had come to Sapphire Bay Resort to study the subtle ways in which language and cultural assumptions reinforced inequality. But now he found himself confronted with a much more overt form of exploitation. For the first time since beginning his undercover work, Miguel seriously considered breaking his cover. He could expose Tyler's plan, alert the authorities, do something to prevent the harm that was being planned in boardrooms and on sun-soaked beaches. But the academic in him hesitated. If he revealed himself now, all of his work would be compromised. The months of careful observation and data collection would be rendered useless. And without hard evidence, would anyone even believe the word of a waiter against a powerful executive? As the first rays of dawn began to creep through his window, Miguel made a decision. He would continue his charade, for now, but he would also redouble his efforts to gather concrete evidence of any wrongdoing. If he could document Tyler's plan in detail, he might be able to expose it without compromising his research. With this resolution in mind, Miguel finally allowed himself to sleep. But his dreams were troubled, filled with looming over helpless villages, and of himself standing silently by as it all unfolded. The next morning came all too soon, and Miguel dragged himself out of bed, his body protesting after too little rest. As he donned his uniform, he steeled himself for another day of pretense and careful observation. But as he stepped out into the bright Caribbean morning, Miguel couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally changed. The stakes had been raised, and he knew that the coming days would test not just his research skills, but his very principles. Little did he know that events were already in motion that would soon force his hand, bringing his two worlds into a collision that would change everything. The tension at Sapphire Bay Resort had reached a fever pitch. As Miguel arrived for his shift, he could sense the nervous energy crackling through the air. The Blackwell Group's retreat was entering its final days, and everyone knew that Jonathan Blackwell would soon be making his decision about the future of his company's leadership. Miguel moved through the resort with practiced ease, his eyes and ears alert for any information that might be relevant to his research or to the troubling plan he had overheard. As he approached the main pool area, he caught sight of Tyler, the man whose unethical scheme had been weighing on Miguel's conscience. Tyler was engaged in an intense conversation with Sandra, their voices low, but their body language agitated. Miguel busied himself with arranging towels nearby, straining to catch their words. "Look, Sandra," Tyler was saying, "I know you have reservations, but think about the potential. If we can implement this plan, we're talking about a 30% increase in profit margins. Blackwell would have to be insane not to promote whoever brings him that kind of success." Sandra frowned, glancing around nervously. "I understand the numbers, Tyler, but the risks are enormous. If this gets out, the PR nightmare alone could tank the company's stock." Tyler waved his hand dismissively. "That's why we need to be smart about it. We create a few shell companies, route everything through some offshore accounts. By the time anyone figures it out, we'll be too big to touch." Miguel felt his stomach churn at the casual way they discussed exploiting people. He wanted nothing more than to confront them, to expose their scheme to the world, but he forced himself to remain calm, to keep playing his role. As he turned to leave, he accidentally knocked over a stack of towels. The sharp sound drew Tyler and Sandra's attention. "Hey you!" Tyler snapped. "Watch what you're doing!" Miguel ducked his head, adopting the subservient posture he had perfected over the months. "My apologies, sir. It won't happen again." Tyler's eyes narrowed as he looked at Miguel more closely. "Wait a minute. You're the one who's always hanging around, aren't you? Always within earshot." Miguel felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. Had he been too obvious in his eavesdropping? Had his mask finally slipped? Sandra laid a hand on Tyler's arm. "Relax, Tyler. He's just doing his job. Besides, it's not like he can understand what we're saying anyway." Tyler didn't look convinced, but he allowed Sandra to lead him away. As they left, Miguel could hear him muttering, "I'm telling you, there's something off about that guy." Heart pounding, Miguel finished cleaning up the towels and made his way to the staff area. He needed a moment to collect himself, to ensure his carefully constructed persona was still firmly in place. As he pushed through the door to the break room, he nearly could with Maria, his fellow server. "Miguel," she exclaimed, "are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Miguel forced a smile. "I'm fine, Maria. Just a little tired. The Blackwell Group is keeping us all on our toes." Maria rolled her eyes. "Tell me about it. I swear if I have to hear one more of their pompous speeches about disrupting the market or whatever, I might scream." Miguel chuckled, but his mind was racing. He needed to be more careful. Tyler's suspicion could jeopardize everything he had worked for. As he left the break room, Miguel resolved to keep a lower profile for the rest of the day. He would continue his observations, but he would need to be more discreet. The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. The Blackwell Group seemed determined to make the most of their final days at the resort, their demands becoming increasingly extravagant. Miguel found himself running from one end of the property to the other, fetching everything from rare vintage wines to specific brands of imported mineral water. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the beach, Miguel was assigned to serve at a private bonfire party for the Blackwell executives. He approached the gathering, tray of cocktails balanced carefully in his hands. The group was already well into their cups. Jonathan Blackwell himself sat at the center, his piercing gaze moving from one hopeful executive to another. "You've all given me a lot to think about," Blackwell was saying as Miguel began distributing drinks. "Each of you has shown promise in your own way, but leadership isn't just about having good ideas. It's about having the courage and the vision to see those ideas through, no matter the obstacles." Miguel kept his head down as he worked, but his ears were straining to catch every word. This was the kind of insight into corporate culture that was invaluable to his research. As he handed Alex his drink, the man grabbed his wrist, pulling him close. "Hey, amigo," Alex slurred, his breath heavy with alcohol. "You must hear all sorts of interesting things working here. Bet you've got some juicy stories, huh?" Miguel felt a jolt of panic. First Tyler's suspicion, and now this. He needed to deflect, to reinforce his image as a simple, uncomprehending server. "I'm sorry, sir," he said, exaggerating his accent. "My English not so good. You want another drink?" Alex laughed at him. "Never mind, buddy. Just keep 'em coming, all right? As Miguel stepped back, he caught Sandra watching him with a thoughtful expression. There was something in her eyes that made him uneasy, a glimmer of suspicion or curiosity that he couldn't quite place. The party continued late into the night, the executives becoming increasingly boisterous as they vied for Blackwell's attention. Miguel moved among them like a ghost, refilling glasses and clearing plates, all while cataloging every interaction, every revealing comment. It was well past midnight when things finally began to wind down. As the group started to disperse, Miguel overheard Tyler cornering Blackwell. "Sir, if I could have just a moment of your time," Tyler said, his words slightly slurred, but his eyes sharp. "I have a proposal that I think could revolutionize our operations in emerging markets." Blackwell raised an eyebrow. "And what might that be, Tyler?" Tyler glanced around, then leaned in close. "It's a bit sensitive, sir. Perhaps we could discuss it somewhere more private?" Miguel felt his heart rate increase. This was the moment Tyler would pitch his unethical scheme to Blackwell. He knew he should walk away, maintain his cover, but the thought of such exploitation being planned right under his nose was too much to bear. Without fully realizing what he was doing, Miguel found himself drifting closer to the pair, pretending to busy himself with cleaning up nearby. "You!" "See, sir," Tyler was saying in a low voice, "there's a loophole in the labor laws of several developing countries where we operate. If we structure our subsidiaries correctly, we could potentially cut our labor costs by more than half." Blackwell's expression remained neutral. "And the workers? What about their rights, their safety?" Tyler waved a hand dismissively. "Technically, we'd be operating within the letter of the law. And let's be honest, sir, these people should be grateful for any job we provide. We'd be doing them a favor." Miguel felt a surge of anger so strong it nearly made him dizzy. How dare they speak of people's lives, people's livelihoods, with such callous disregard? Before he could stop himself, Miguel straightened up, his carefully cultivated accent slipping away as he spoke. "Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing. Have you considered the ethical implications of such a plan? The potential for exploitation and harm?" The words hung in the air for a moment, the sudden silence deafening. Tyler and Blackwell turned to stare at Miguel, their expressions a mixture of shock and confusion. Tyler was the first to recover. How dare you eavesdrop on a private conversation? And what happened to your accent?" Miguel knew he had crossed a line, that there was no going back now. But a strange sense of calm had settled over him. For months, he had bitten his tongue, played a role. Now, finally, he could speak his truth. "My name is Dr. Miguel Alvarez," he said, his voice steady and clear. "I'm a professor of linguistics at the University of Havana, and I've been conducting research on linguistic imperialism and cultural power dynamics in the tourism industry." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the sound of the waves seemed to have faded away. Blackwell's eyes narrowed as he studied Miguel intently. "A professor?" Blackwell said finally. "Pretending to be a waiter? Explain yourself, Dr. Alvarez." Quickly, Miguel took a deep breath. "For the past 6 months, I've been working undercover at this resort, observing and documenting the interactions between tourists and local staff. My goal was to gather data on how language and cultural assumptions reinforce existing power structures and perpetuate harmful stereotypes." Tyler's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "You've been spying on us. That's a violation of privacy." Blackwell held up a hand, silencing Tyler. "Let him speak. I want to hear what he has to say." Encouraged by Blackwell's apparent willingness to listen, Miguel continued, "What I've observed here goes beyond mere cultural insensitivity. I've witnessed systemic dehumanization, casual racism, and now plans for outright exploitation. Your employees, Mr. Blackwell, speak of the people in developing countries as if they're not even human, as if their lives and livelihoods are nothing more than numbers on a spreadsheet." Tyler sputtered, "This is ridiculous. You can't possibly take the word of some waiter, no, some so-called professor over a loyal employee." Blackwell's gaze never left Miguel. "And what would you have me do, Dr. Alvarez? Assuming what you say is true, how do you propose we address these issues?" Miguel hadn't expected this question. He had been so focused on exposing the truth that he hadn't thought beyond this moment. But as he looked at Blackwell, he saw something. In the man's eyes, a glimmer of genuine interest, perhaps even concern. "It starts with awareness," Miguel said slowly. "With acknowledging the humanity of every person your company interacts interacts with, from the highest executive to the most junior worker in your overseas factories. It means implementing ethical labor practices not just because it's legally required, but because it's the right thing to do. He paused, then added, it also means fostering a corporate culture that values diversity and cultural understanding. The kind of casual racism and cultural insensitivity I've witnessed here is not just morally wrong, it's bad for business. In an increasingly globalized world, companies that truly understand and respect diverse cultures will have a significant competitive advantage. Blackwell nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Interesting, very interesting indeed, Dr. Alvarez. I think we have a lot more to discuss. Tyler looked like he was about to explode. Sir, you can't seriously be considering— Enough, Tyler. Blackwell cut him off sharply. Your proposal has made it abundantly clear that you lack the ethical foundation and global perspective necessary for a leadership position in my company. He turned back to Miguel. Dr. Alvarez, I'd like to invite you to present your findings to my board of directors. I think we could learn a great deal from your research. Miguel felt a wave of relief wash over him. I would be honored, Mr. Blackwell. Thank you for listening. As Blackwell led Miguel away to discuss the details, he could hear Tyler's angry protests fading into the background. The weight of months of pretense, of biting his tongue in the face of injustice, began to lift from his shoulders. He knew there would be consequences for his actions. His research methods would likely face scrutiny, and he had potentially burned bridges in the hospitality industry. But as he walked along the moonlit beach with one of the most powerful men in the tech world, discussing ways to create meaningful change, Miguel felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. The next morning, as news of Miguel's true identity spread through the resort, he found himself the center of attention. Some staff members felt betrayed, while others were intrigued by his research. The Blackwell group was in chaos, with executives scrambling to distance themselves from Tyler's unethical proposals and reframe their own behavior in a more positive light. As Miguel packed his belongings, preparing to leave the role of waiter behind forever, Maria appeared at his door. So, she said, leaning against the doorframe. A professor, huh? I always knew there was something different about you, Miguel. Miguel smiled ruefully. I'm sorry for the deception, Maria. I hope you can understand why it was necessary. Maria nodded slowly. I think I do, and I have to admit, it's pretty satisfying to know that all those stuck-up guests were being studied like lab rats. She paused, then added, do you think your research will really make a difference? Miguel looked at her, seeing in her face the hope and skepticism of so many hard-working people he had met during his time at the resort. I hope so, Maria. With Blackwell's support, we have a real chance to implement meaningful changes, not just here, but in the broader industry. As he left his small staff room for the last time, Miguel felt a mix of emotions. He was excited about the opportunities ahead, but he also felt a twinge of sadness. Despite the challenges, there had been moments of genuine connection and humanity during his time as a waiter. Making his way through the resort, Miguel was stopped by several guests who had heard about his true identity. Some were angry, feeling they had been deceived. Others were curious, peppering him with questions about his research. As he reached the main entrance, he found Jonathan Blackwell waiting for him. Dr. Alvarez, Blackwell, I've made arrangements for you to present your findings to my board next week. I think you'll find them very interested in what you have to say. Miguel shook his hand firmly. Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. I'm grateful for the opportunity. As he was about to step into the waiting car, Miguel heard a familiar voice calling his name. He turned to see Alex jogging towards him, looking somewhat sheepish. Dr. Alvarez, Alex said, slightly out of breath. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how I treated you, for the things I said. I never stopped to think about the impact of my words and actions. Miguel studied him for a moment, seeing genuine remorse in the young man's eyes. Apology accepted, Alex. But remember, it's not just about being sorry. It's about doing better, about actively working to understand and respect other cultures. Alex nodded earnestly. I understand, and I want to do better. Do you think maybe we could talk more about your research sometime? I feel like I have a lot to learn. Miguel smiled. I'd like that, Alex. I think we all have a lot to learn from each other. As the car pulled away from Sapphire Bay Resort, Miguel looked back at the place that had been his home and workplace for the past 6 months. He knew that his actions had set in motion changes that would ripple out far beyond this one resort, this one company. There would be challenges challenges ahead. His research methods would be scrutinized, his findings debated, but as he watched the resort recede in the distance, Miguel felt a sense of hope. He had taken a stand, spoken truth to power, and found that sometimes, if you have the courage to speak up, people will listen. The car turned onto the main road, and Sapphire Bay disappeared from view. Miguel took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his waiter's uniform for the last time. He was Dr. Miguel Alvarez again, professor of linguistics, and now perhaps an agent of change in the corporate world. As he settled in for the long drive to the airport, Miguel's mind was already racing with ideas for his presentation to Blackwell's board. He had gathered so much data, witnessed so many interactions that needed to be addressed, but more than that, he had lived an experience that had changed him profoundly. He pulled out his notebook, the same one he had used to jot down observations during quiet moments at the resort. But now, instead of recording instances of cultural insensitivity or linguistic power dynamics, he began to sketch out a vision for a more equitable, respectful approach to global business and tourism. The road ahead would not be easy. Changing ingrained attitudes and corporate cultures was a monumental task, but as the Caribbean sun shone down on the winding coastal road, Miguel felt ready for the challenge. He had found his voice, and he intended to use it to make a difference. One conversation at a time. The sleek corporate headquarters of Blackwell Industries loomed before Miguel as he stepped out of the taxi. The towering glass and steel structure seemed a world away from the sun-drenched beaches of Sapphire Bay Resort. Yet as he straightened his tie and took a deep breath, Miguel felt the same sense of purpose that had driven him throughout his undercover research. Inside, the lobby bustled with activity. Smartly dressed executives hurried past, their conversations a mix of tech, jargon and business speak that would have been incomprehensible to the Miguel of a few weeks ago, the one who had played the role of a simple waiter. Now he understood every word, and the irony wasn't lost on him. A receptionist greeted him with a polite smile. "Dr. Alvarez, Mr. Blackwell is expecting you. Please take the elevator to the 50th floor." As the elevator whisked him upwards, Miguel's mind raced. He had spent the past week preparing for this presentation, distilling months of research into a format that he hoped would resonate with Blackwell's board of directors. But more than just presenting data, he knew he needed to make them feel the weight of their actions, to understand the real-world impact of their decisions. The elevator doors opened onto a plush reception area. Jonathan Blackwell himself was waiting, his piercing gaze softened by a slight smile. "Dr. Alvarez," Blackwell said, extending his hand, "I'm glad you could make it. Are you ready to shake things up a bit?" Miguel shook his hand firmly. "As ready as I'll ever be, Mr. Blackwell. Thank you again for this opportunity." Blackwell led him into a large conference room. Around a polished table sat a group of men and women who collectively controlled one of the most powerful tech companies in the world. Miguel felt a momentary flutter of nerves, but he pushed it aside. He had faced down months of casual racism and dehumanization. He could handle a boardroom. "Ladies and gentlemen," Blackwell began, "I'd like to introduce Dr. Miguel Alvarez. Some of you may have heard about the rather unconventional way we met into our company culture and global operations that I believe we need to hear." Miguel stepped forward, connecting his laptop to the room's presentation system. As his first slide appeared on the screen, he took a deep breath and began. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. Distinguished members of the board, I'm here today to share with you the findings of my research into linguistic imperialism and cultural power dynamics in the tourism industry. But more than that, I'm here to show you how these issues directly impact your business, your employees, and the communities in which you operate." So for the next hour, Miguel led the board through his research. He presented data on the frequency of culturally insensitive remarks, the impact of linguistic barriers on employee satisfaction and productivity, and the long-term economic consequences of exploitative labor practices. But it wasn't just numbers and charts. Miguel shared stories, real experiences he had witnessed or been subjected to during his time undercover. He described the look in a young housekeeper's eyes when a guest had casually dismissed her entire culture as primitive. He recounted overheard conversations where executives blithely discussed ways to exploit local labor laws. As he spoke, Miguel could see the impact his words were having. Some board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others leaned forward, clearly engaged. Blackwell himself remained impassive, but his eyes never left Miguel. "The issues I've outlined today aren't unique to the tourism industry, Miguel concluded. They're symptomatic of a broader problem in how global corporations interact with diverse cultures. But herein lies an opportunity. By addressing these issues head-on, by fostering genuine cultural understanding and respect, Blackwell Industries can not only improve its ethical standing, but also gain a significant competitive advantage in an increasingly globalized market. As Miguel finished, a heavy silence fell over the room. He waited, heart pounding, for someone to speak. Finally, an older woman at the far end of the table leaned forward. "Dr. Alvarez, your research is certainly compelling, but what exactly are you proposing we do? We can't control every word our employees say, every thought they have." Miguel nodded, having anticipated this question. "You're right. We can't control thoughts, but we can create a corporate culture that values cultural competence as much as technical skill. I'm proposing a comprehensive overhaul of your diversity and inclusion programs with a specific focus on cross-cultural communication and understanding." He clicked to his final slide, which outlined a series of proposed initiatives. This would include mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all employees, revised hiring practices to ensure diverse representation at all levels of the company, and the establishment of an ethics board to review all major decisions for potential cultural impact. Another board member, a man with a skeptical frown, spoke up. "This all sounds very noble, Dr. Alvarez, but let's be frank. How does this benefit our bottom line? We're not a charity, we're a business." Miguel had been waiting for this opening. "I'm glad you asked. Studies have shown that companies with strong diversity and inclusion programs outperform their competitors by a significant margin. They're better able to understand and serve diverse markets. They have higher employee satisfaction and retention rates, and they're more innovative." He pulled up a chart showing the performance of companies with strong diversity programs compared to those without. Furthermore, in an age where consumers are increasingly conscious of corporate ethics, taking a strong stance on these issues can significantly enhance your brand value and customer loyalty. The discussion that followed was intense. Board members debated the practicality of Miguel's proposals, the potential costs, the risks of changing too much too quickly. But as the conversation progressed, Miguel could see a shift happening. The question was no longer whether they should act, but how best to implement these changes. As the meeting drew to a close, Blackwell stood up. "Dr. Alvarez, thank you for your presentation. You've given us a lot to think about. I'd like you to work with our HR and ethics departments to develop a more detailed implementation plan. Can you stick around for a few days?" Miguel felt a surge of excitement. This was more than he had dared to hope for. "Of course, Mr. Blackwell. I'd be happy to." As the board members filed out, many stopped to shake Miguel's hand or ask follow-up questions. The woman who had first spoken approached him with a thoughtful expression. "Dr. Alvarez, I'm Maria Rodriguez, Head of Global Operations. I have to admit, when Jonathan first told us about you, I was skeptical, but you've opened my eyes today. I'd like to discuss how we can facilities." Miguel spent the next few days in a whirlwind of meetings and workshops. He worked closely with Blackwell Industries' HR team to revamp their training programs, consulted with the legal department on updating their ethics policies, and even began planning a company-wide cultural competence initiative. Throughout it all, Miguel was struck by the genuine enthusiasm many employees showed for these changes. It seemed that once the conversation had been started, once people were given permission to acknowledge and address these issues, there was a real hunger for improvement. On his final day at Blackwell Industries, Miguel found himself once again in Jonathan Blackwell's office. The tech mogul looked tired but satisfied. "Well, Dr. Alvarez, I think it's safe to say you've made quite an impact here," Blackwell said, gesturing for Miguel to take a seat. "I've been getting reports from all departments about the positive response to your initiatives." Miguel smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment he hadn't experienced in years. "I'm glad to hear it, Mr. Blackwell. Your employees have shown a real commitment to making these changes work." Blackwell nodded, then leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "Miguel, I'll be honest with you. What you've shown us, what you've helped us start here, I think it's just the tip of the iceberg. We need someone to continue this work, to ensure that these aren't just temporary changes, but a fundamental shift in how we operate. Miguel felt a flutter of anticipation. What are you suggesting, Mr. Blackwell? I want to create a new position, Chief Cultural Officer, someone who will oversee all of our diversity and inclusion initiatives, who will be involved in major decisions to ensure we're living up to our ethical commitments. And I want that someone to be you. For a moment, Miguel was speechless. This was far beyond anything he had imagined when he first conceived of his research project. Mr. Blackwell, I'm honored, but I'm an academic, not a corporate executive. Blackwell waved away his protest. That's exactly why you're perfect for this role. You bring an outside perspective, a depth of knowledge and experience that we desperately need. Of course, I understand if you need some time to consider. No, Miguel interrupted, surprising himself with the speed and certainty of his response. No, I don't need time. I accept. As he left Blackwell's office, his head spinning with the enormity of what had just happened, Miguel's phone buzzed. It was a message from Maria, his former co-worker at Sapphire Bay Resort. Hey, Professor, heard you're making waves up in the corporate world. Just wanted to let you know, things are changing down here too. The new management has been implementing all sorts of new training programs. It's like a whole different place. Thank you, Miguel. Felt a warmth spread through his chest. This was why he had done it all, why he had spent months living a double life, enduring casual cruelty and biting his tongue, not for academic accolades or corporate positions, but for real, tangible change in people's lives. As he stepped out of Blackwell Industries headquarters, the city bustling around him, Miguel felt a sense of purpose and possibility he hadn't experienced in years. He'd set out to study the problem of cultural insensitivity and linguistic imperialism, but he had ended up becoming part of the solution. The challenges ahead were daunting. Changing corporate culture, especially in a global company like Blackwell Industries, would not be easy. There would be resistance, setbacks, moments of doubt. But as Miguel hailed a taxi to take him to his new apartment, he felt ready for whatever lay ahead. His phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from the University of Havana asking about the status of his research paper. Miguel smiled to himself. He had a feeling his findings were going to be a bit more extensive than originally planned. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, Miguel found himself thinking about the journey that had brought him here. From a quiet professor in Havana to an undercover waiter, and now to a corporate executive tasked with transforming one of the world's largest tech companies. It was a path he never could have predicted, but one he now realized he had been preparing for his entire career. The city skyline stretched out before him, a forest of gleaming towers reaching towards the sky. Somewhere in that urban jungle was his new office, his new life. But Miguel knew that a part of him would always be that waiter at Sapphire Bay Resort, quietly observing, always learning. As the taxi merged into traffic, Miguel pulled out his notebook, the same one he had used to jot down observations during his time undercover. But now, instead of documenting instances of cultural insensitivity, he began to sketch out plans for his new role, ideas for training programs, communication, ways to ensure ethical decision-making at every level of the company. He thought about the people he had met along the way, Maria and the other resort staff who had welcomed him as one of their own, Alex, the young executive who had shown a genuine desire to learn and improve, even Tyler, whose unethical scheming had ultimately led to this moment of change. Miguel realized that his work was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning, but he was ready for the challenge. He had found his voice, and now he had a platform from which to make it heard. As the taxi wound its way through the city streets, Miguel felt a sense of optimism about the future. He knew that change wouldn't happen overnight, that there would be obstacles and setbacks along the way. But he also knew that every small step, every mind opened, every policy changed was a victory. The taxi pulled up in front of a sleek apartment building, Miguel's new home. As he paid the driver and gathered his belongings, he took a moment to look up at the towering structure. It was a far cry from his modest apartment in Havana or the cramped staff quarters at Sapphire Bay Resort. Inside his new apartment, Miguel was struck by the space and luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city, and every amenity amenity he could think of was at his fingertips. For a moment, he felt a twinge of guilt, remembering the cramped conditions many of his former co-workers at the resort lived in. But then he reminded himself why he was here. His position, his new lifestyle, they weren't ends in themselves. They were tools, means to effect real change. From here, he had the power to improve the lives of thousands of workers around the world, to shape corporate policies that would ripple out far beyond Blackwell Industries. As he unpacked his meager belongings, Miguel's hand fell on the worn uniform he had worn as a waiter. He held it up, running his fingers over the fabric, remembering the weight it had carried, both literally and figuratively. After a moment's hesitation, he carefully folded it and placed it in a drawer. It was a reminder of where he had been and why he was here. That night, as Miguel stood at his window looking out over the glittering cityscape, he felt a mix of excitement and trepidation about the task ahead. Changing a corporate culture was no small feat, and he knew there would be resistance, both overt and subtle, but he also knew he wasn't alone. He thought of Jonathan Blackwell's commitment to change, of Maria Rodriguez's eagerness to implement new ideas in global operations, of the HR team's enthusiasm for revamping their programs. There were allies everywhere, people who wanted to do better, who just needed the tools and the permission to make it happen. As he prepared for bed, the phone buzzed one last time. It was a message from Dr. Emilia Rodriguez, his mentor at the University of Havana. "Heard the news," it read. "Remember, Miguel, you're not just changing a company, you're changing the conversation. Keep pushing, keep questioning, keep learning. We're all proud of you." Miguel smiled, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Tomorrow would be his first official day as Chief Cultural Officer of Blackwell Industries. There would be meetings to attend, policies to draft, strategies to develop. But underlying it all was a simple truth, one that had driven him from the very beginning. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their language, culture, or position. As he drifted off to sleep, Miguel's mind was already racing with ideas for his new role. He had started this journey seeking to understand the problem of cultural insensitivity in global business. Now, he had the chance to be part of the solution. It was a daunting task, but one he was ready to face head-on. The next morning, Miguel woke early, energized despite the long days of preparation. He dressed carefully in a new suit, a far cry from the casual clothes of a professor or the uniform of a waiter. As he knotted his tie, he caught sight of himself in the mirror and was struck by the transformation. The man looking back at him was no longer playing a role or hiding his true self. This was Dr. Miguel Alvarez, Chief Cultural Officer, ready to take on the corporate world. He arrived at Blackwell Industries headquarters just as the early morning rush was beginning. "The show," security guard nodded respectfully as he entered, and Miguel felt a momentary disorientation. It was strange to be welcomed openly into a place where, just weeks ago, he would have been barely noticed. In the elevator, he found himself standing next to a group of young interns, their excitement palpable as they discussed a new project. Miguel smiled to himself, remembering his own nervous energy on his first day undercover at the resort. The doors opened at his floor, and as he stepped out, he overheard one intern whisper, "CCO." Miguel's new office was spacious and bright, with views over the city. On his desk, he found a welcome package from HR and a handwritten note from Jonathan Blackwell. "The real work begins now. I know you're up for the challenge." As he settled in, Miguel's assistant, a capable-looking woman named Sarah, appeared at his door. "Good morning, Dr. Alvarez. Your 9 a.m. is here, the head of global recruitment. Shall I send him in?" And just like that, Miguel was plunged into his new role. The morning flew by in a whirlwind of meetings, each one presenting new challenges and opportunities. The head of global recruitment was eager to discuss ways to diversify their hiring pool. The marketing team wanted input on a new campaign to ensure it was culturally sensitive. The legal department needed his insights on updating their anti-discrimination policies. Throughout it all, Miguel found himself drawing on every aspect of his experience, his academic knowledge, his time undercover, and the insights he had gained. Over the past weeks working with various departments, he was no longer just an observer or a researcher. He was an active participant in shaping the culture of one of the world's largest corporations. As lunchtime approached, Miguel's phone buzzed with a message from Jonathan Blackwell. "How's the first day going? Join me for lunch?" Over sandwiches in Blackwell's office, the two men discussed the morning's events. "I have to admit, Miguel," Blackwell said, "I was a bit worried. As the weeks passed, Miguel settled into his role as Chief Cultural Officer at Blackwell Industries. Each day brought new challenges and opportunities, and he found himself drawing on every aspect of his diverse experiences to navigate the complex world of corporate culture change. One morning, as Miguel reviewed the latest diversity reports in his office, there was a knock at the door. Sarah, his assistant, poked her head in. "Dr. Alvarez, there's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent." Miguel looked up, puzzled. He didn't have any appointments scheduled for the morning. "Who is it?" Sarah hesitated. "He says his name is Tyler Matthews. He used to work here, I believe." Miguel felt a jolt of surprise. Tyler Matthews, the man whose unethical schemes had inadvertently led to Miguel's current position. "Send him in, please." Moments later, Tyler strode into the office. He looked different from the arrogant executive Miguel had known at Sapphire Bay Resort. His suit was slightly rumpled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "Dr. Alvarez," Tyler said, his voice a mixture of respect and resentment. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Miguel gestured for Tyler to take a seat. "Not at all, Mr. Matthews. What can I do for you?" Tyler sat down heavily, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I'll cut to the chase. I've been trying to find work since Sapphire Bay, but word has gotten around. No one wants to touch me with a 10-foot pole." Miguel leaned back in his chair, studying the man before him. "I'm sorry to hear that, Tyler, but I'm not sure how I can help." Tyler leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since then, about what you said, about ethical business practices and cultural sensitivity. I was wrong, okay? I see that now, and I want to make it right." Miguel raised an eyebrow. "Make it right how, exactly?" "I want to help," Tyler said. "I know the ins and outs of how companies try to skirt ethical guidelines. I could help you. Close those loopholes. Make sure other people don't make the same mistakes I did." For a moment, Miguel was speechless. This was the last thing he had expected when he came into work this morning. Part of him wanted to dismiss Tyler outright, to see this as just another scheme. But as he looked into the man's eyes, he saw something that gave him pause, genuine remorse. "Tyler," Miguel said slowly, "I appreciate you coming here and saying this, but you have to understand, trust is not easily rebuilt. If you're serious about this, it's going to take more than just words." Tyler nodded eagerly. I know. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Sensitivity training, ethics courses, whatever you think is necessary. I just want a chance to prove that I've changed." Miguel considered for a long moment. This could be a tremendous opportunity, a chance to turn a former adversary into an ally. But it was also a risk. If Tyler hadn't truly changed, if this was just another manipulation, it could undermine everything Miguel had worked for. Finally, Miguel made a decision. "All right, Tyler, I'm willing to give you a chance, but it won't be easy. You'll start at the bottom as an intern in our ethics department. You'll go through every training program we have, and you'll be under close supervision. If you show real commitment and growth, we can discuss a more permanent position. Are you willing to do that?" The relief. "Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Alvarez. I won't let you down." As Tyler left the office, Miguel sat back, still somewhat stunned by the unexpected turn of events. He knew not everyone would agree with his decision to give Tyler a second chance. But if they were truly committed to creating a culture of growth and learning, didn't that have to extend to everyone, even those who had made serious mistakes? Over the next few months, Miguel watched Tyler closely. To his surprise and relief, the former executive threw himself into his new role with genuine enthusiasm. He completed every training program with high marks, offered valuable insights into potential ethical pitfalls, and showed a real commitment to changing his ways. One day, as Miguel was leaving a board meeting, he overheard a conversation between Tyler and another intern. The young woman was expressing frustration with a particularly challenging aspect of their cultural sensitivity training. "I just don't see why we need to go into so much detail," she was saying. "Isn't it enough to just treat everyone the same?" Tyler shook his head. "That's what I used to think too. But it's not about treating everyone the same. It's about understanding and respecting differences. Look, let me show you how this applies in a real-world business scenario." Miguel smiled to himself as he walked past. It seemed Tyler truly had taken the lessons to heart. As Miguel's first year as Chief Cultural Officer drew to a close, Jonathan Blackwell called him into his office for a performance review. Miguel felt a flutter of nerves as he sat down across from the CEO. Blackwell smiled, putting him at ease. "Miguel, I have to say, when I first offered you this position, I wasn't entirely sure how it would work out, but you've exceeded all my expectations." He pushed a report across the desk. "Our employee satisfaction scores are up 30%. We've seen a 25% increase in applications from diverse candidates, and our new ethical business practices have actually opened up markets we couldn't access before." Miguel felt a surge of pride. It hadn't been easy, but it seemed their efforts were paying off. "There's just one thing," Blackwell continued, his expression turning serious. "We've been invited to speak at the Global Business Ethics Summit in Geneva. I want you to represent Blackwell Industries." Miguel's eyes widened. The summit was one of the most prestigious events in the corporate world. "Mr. Blackwell, I'm honored, but are you sure there will be CEOs and world leaders there?" Blackwell nodded. "Exactly, and I want them to hear from the man who's been driving these changes. You have a unique perspective, Miguel. Your journey from undercover waiter to chief cultural officer is a powerful story. I think it could inspire real change across the industry." As Miguel left Blackwell's office, his mind was already racing with ideas for his speech. This was an opportunity to take the lessons he'd learned, the changes they'd implemented at Blackwell Industries, and share them with the world. The weeks leading up to the summit were a whirlwind of preparation. Miguel worked tirelessly on his speech, drawing on his academic background, his experiences at Sapphire Bay Resort, and the insights he'd gained in his role at Blackwell Industries. Finally, the day of the summit arrived. As Miguel took the stage, looking out over a sea of the most powerful people in global business, he felt a moment of nervousness. But then he thought of Maria, of the other staff at Sapphire Bay, of all the people whose lives could be improved by what he had to say. He took a deep breath and began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dr. Miguel Alvarez. A year ago, I was working as a waiter at a luxury resort, enduring daily microaggressions and witnessing blatant ethical violations. Today, I stand before you as the Chief Cultural Officer of Blackwell Industries. My journey is a testament to the power of cultural understanding, ethical business practices, and the capacity for change." As Miguel spoke, he could see the audience becoming increasingly engaged. He shared stories from his time undercover, laid out the changes implemented at Blackwell Industries, and presented hard data on the positive impacts of ethical, culturally sensitive business practices. "The future of global business lies not in exploitation, but in genuine partnership," Miguel concluded. "Not in ignorance, but in understanding. Not in short-term gains, but in sustainable ethical growth. The challenges are great, but so are the opportunities. Together, we can create a business world that uplifts rather than exploits, that unites rather than divides. The choice is ours." As Miguel finished speaking, there was a moment of silence. Then, slowly, the audience rose to their feet, applauding. Miguel felt a wave of emotion wash over him. This was why he had done it all. The months of undercover work, the long challenges and difficult conversation. It was all for this moment, this chance to shape the future of global business. After the speech, Miguel found himself surrounded by CEOs and business leaders, all eager to learn more about Blackwell Industries' cultural initiative. As he answered questions and exchanged contact information, he caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. It was Alex, the young executive from Sapphire Bay Resort, who had shown a genuine desire to learn and improve. He was now wearing a badge, identifying him as a representative of a major tech company. Alex approached, a warm smile on his face. "Dr. Alvarez, that was an incredible speech. I don't know if you remember me, but..." "Of course I remember you, Alex," Miguel said, shaking his hand. "It's good to see you. How have you been?" Alex's smile widened. "I've been good. Great, actually. After what happened at Sapphire Bay, I did a lot of thinking. I realized I needed to make some changes in how I approached my work and my interactions with others." He gestured to his badge. "I joined a company that prioritizes ethical business practices and cultural sensitivity." Your words that day at the resort, they really stuck with me. I've been working hard to educate myself and to advocate for better practices within my company. Miguel felt a warmth spread through his chest. This was the ripple effect he had hoped for, the small changes that could add up to a transformation of corporate culture. "I'm glad to hear that, Alex," Miguel said. said. Sincerely, it's not an easy journey, but it's an important one. As the summit wound down, Miguel found himself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought him to this point. From a quiet professor in Havana to an undercover waiter, and now to a respected voice in global business ethics. It was a path he never could have predicted, but one he now realized he had been preparing for his entire life. On the flight back to New York, Miguel began sketching out plans for the future. The summit had opened up new possibilities, new partnerships that could amplify the work they were doing at Blackwell Industries. He thought about Tyler, about Alex, about all the people who had shown the capacity for growth and change. There was still so much work to be done, but for the first time, Miguel felt like they were truly making progress. As the plane descended towards the glittering New York skyline, Miguel smiled to himself. He had set out to study the problem of cultural insensitivity in global business, but he had ended up becoming part of the solution. It wasn't always easy, and there would always be new challenges to face, but Miguel knew that with persistence, empathy, and a commitment to continuous learning, real change was possible. The future, he realized, was full of possibilities, and he was ready to face it, armed with the knowledge, experiences, and relationships he had gained on his incredible journey from waiter to chief cultural officer. As Miguel stepped off the plane, his phone buzzed with a message from Jonathan Blackwell. "Saw your speech online. You've made us all proud. Let's talk about next steps when you're back in the office." Miguel smiled, already looking forward to the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. He had found his calling, his way to make a real difference in the world, and he was just getting started. The impact of Miguel's speech at the Global Business Ethics Summit reverberated through the corporate world in the weeks and months that followed. Blackwell Industries found itself at the center of a growing movement toward more ethical and culturally sensitive business practices. Requests for consultations and partnerships flooded in, and Miguel's schedule became a whirlwind of meetings, interviews, and strategy sessions. One morning, as Miguel reviewed the latest batch of partnership proposals, Sarah knocked on his office door. "Dr. Alvarez, there's a call for you on line 1. It's Maria from Sapphire Bay Resort." Miguel's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He hadn't spoken to Maria since leaving the resort over a year ago. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll take it." He picked up the phone, curious about what his former co-worker might want. "Maria, this is Miguel. It's good to hear from you." Maria's voice came through, a mix of excitement and nervousness. "Miguel, or should I say Dr. Alvarez, I hope I'm not bothering you. I saw your speech online and, well, I needed to talk to you." "You're not bothering me at all," Miguel assured her. "What's on your mind?" There was a pause before Maria continued. "Things have been changing here at the resort since you left. The new management has been implementing all these new policies and training programs. It's like a different place now." Miguel smiled, remembering the message Maria had sent him when he first joined Blackwell Industries. "That's wonderful to hear, Maria. I'm glad things are improving." "They are," Maria agreed. "You see, I've been thinking a lot about what you did, how you used your experience here to make real changes, and I realized I want to do something like that too." Miguel leaned forward in his chair, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "I want to go back to school," Maria said, her voice gaining confidence. "I want to study hospitality management and ethics. I think there's so much more we could be doing to improve things in this industry, but I don't know where to start, and I was hoping, well, that you might have some advice." Miguel felt a surge of pride and affection for his former co-worker. This was exactly the kind of ripple effect he had hoped his work would create. "Maria, that's fantastic. I'd be more than happy to help. In fact, I think I might have an idea." Over the next hour, Miguel and Maria discussed her goals and aspirations. By the end of the call, they had sketched out a plan. Miguel would use his connections to help Maria apply for a scholarship program that Blackwell Industries had recently established for promising students from underrepresented backgrounds in the hospitality industry. As he hung up the phone, Miguel couldn't help but reflect on how far things had come, from those early days of frustration and hidden observations at the resort to now, where the seeds of change were beginning to sprout in unexpected places. His reflections were interrupted by another knock at the door. This time, it was Tyler Matthews, the former executive who had been working as an intern in the ethics department. "Dr. Alvarez, do you have a moment?" Tyler asked, looking uncharacteristically nervous. Miguel nodded, gesturing for Tyler to take a seat. "Of course, Tyler. What's on your mind?" Tyler sat down, fidgeting with the folder in his hands. "I've completed all the training programs, and my internship is coming to an end. I wanted to talk to you about what's next." Miguel leaned back in his chair, studying Tyler carefully. Over the past months, he had watched the former executive transform from a ruthless businessman into someone who genuinely seemed to care about ethical practices. But there was still a part of Miguel that wondered if it was all an act. "All right, Tyler," Miguel said, "let's hear your thoughts." Tyler took a deep breath. "I know I've made mistakes in the past, big ones, and I know that trust is something that has to be earned over time, but I want you to know that these past months have genuinely changed me. I see now how short-sighted and harmful my old way of thinking was." He opened the folder he had been holding, pulling out a document. "I put together a proposal for a new initiative. It's a program to help companies identify and address ethical blind spots in their operations, especially in developing markets." Miguel took the document, skimming through it with interest. The proposal was thorough, drawing on Tyler's insider knowledge of corporate loopholes, but framing everything within a strong ethical framework. "This is impressive work, Tyler," Miguel said, looking up from the document. "But why bring this to me? Why not take it to another company, start fresh somewhere else?" Tyler met Miguel's gaze steadily. "Because I want to do this the right way, and I can't think of anyone better to keep me accountable than you, Dr. Alvarez. If you'll have me, I'd like to develop this program here at Blackwell Industries." Miguel sat back considering. It was a risk, certainly. Tyler's past actions had caused real harm, and there would be those who would question giving him this level of responsibility. But wasn't this exactly the kind of transformation they were trying to encourage? After a long moment, Miguel nodded. "All right, Tyler, we'll give this a shot. But understand, you'll be under close supervision. Any hint of backsliding, any ethical missteps, and this ends immediately. Are we clear?" Tyler's face broke into a relieved smile. "Crystal clear, Dr. Alvarez. Thank you. I won't let you down." As Tyler left the office, Miguel turned to look out the window, marveling at the strange turns his life had taken. From studying the problem to implementing solutions, from confronting unethical executives to mentoring them toward change. It was a responsibility he never could have imagined taking on, but one he now embraced fully. The next few months saw Miguel splitting his time between his regular duties at Blackwell Industries and helping to develop Tyler's new initiative. They named it the Ethical Blind Spot Identification and Resolution (EBIR) program, and as they began pilot testing with a few smaller companies, the results were promising. One afternoon, as Miguel and Tyler were reviewing the latest EBIR data, Jonathan Blackwell stopped by Miguel's office. "Gentlemen," Blackwell said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth, "I hope I'm not interrupting anything too crucial." Miguel and Tyler both stood, greeting the CEO. "Not at all. We were just going over some preliminary results from the EBIR program. Would you like to see?" Blackwell waved a hand. "Perhaps later. Right now I have some news I think you'll both find interesting." He pulled out a tablet, bringing up a financial news website. "Have you seen the latest market reports?" Miguel and Tyler exchanged glances, then shook their heads. They had been so absorbed in their work that they hadn't been following the financial news closely. Blackwell's smile widened as he handed the tablet to Miguel. "Take a look at the top performers in the tech sector for this quarter." Miguel's eyes widened as he scanned the report. Blackwell Industries was at the top of the list, showing significant growth and outperforming all major competitors. "This is incredible," he murmured, passing the tablet to Tyler. "It is," Blackwell agreed. "And do you know what the analysts are attributing it to? Our ethical business practices and cultural initiatives. It seems your work isn't just making us feel good, gentlemen. It's also good for business." Tyler looked up from the tablet, his expression a mix of surprise and satisfaction. "I have to admit, sir, when I was first exposed to these ideas, I thought they would be a drag on profitability. I've never been happier to be proven wrong." Blackwell clapped Tyler on the shoulder. "That's the kind of growth mindset we need. Matthews, now the reason I'm here is that I've been invited to speak at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and I want you both to come with me." Miguel felt a jolt of excitement. The World Economic Forum was one of the most prestigious gatherings of global leaders in business, politics, and academia. "Mr. Blackwell, that's an incredible opportunity, but are you sure you want us there?" Blackwell nodded firmly. "Absolutely. Miguel, your journey and your insights have been the driving force behind our transformation, and Tyler, your EBIR program represents the next phase of ethical ethical business evolution. The world needs to hear from both of you. As Blackwell left, Miguel and Tyler looked at each other, the magnitude of the opportunity sinking in. Well, Tyler said with a nervous laugh, I guess we'd better start preparing. The weeks leading up to the World Economic Forum were a blur of preparation. Miguel and Tyler worked tirelessly on their presentations, refining their message and gathering data to support their arguments. They knew they would be facing a tough audience, one that would need convincing that ethical business practices could coexist with profitability. Finally, the day arrived. As their plane touched down in Zurich, Miguel felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. This was a chance to take their message to the global stage, to influence the most powerful decision-makers in the world. The forum itself was a whirlwind of panel discussions, networking events, and intense debates. Miguel found himself engaged in conversations with CEOs, world leaders, and renowned academics, all eager to hear about Blackwell Industries' transformation. On the second day of the forum, it was time for their main presentation. As Miguel took the stage alongside Jonathan Blackwell and Tyler, he looked out over the audience, filled with some of the most influential people in the world. Blackwell began the presentation, outlining the company's journey and the initial resistance they had faced. Then he turned the stage over to Miguel. Taking a deep breath, Miguel stepped up to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dr. Miguel Alvarez. 2 years ago, I was working undercover as a waiter in a luxury resort, documenting the casual cruelty and ethical blindness that often characterizes interactions between powerful corporations and local communities. Today, I stand before you as the Chief Cultural Officer of Blackwell Industries, here to tell you that there is a better way to do business. Over the next hour, Miguel laid out the changes they had implemented at Blackwell Industries, the challenges they had faced, and the remarkable results they had achieved. He spoke of the ripple effects of employees like Maria who had been inspired to further their education and make changes in their own spheres of influence. Then it was Tyler's turn. The former executive, once the embodiment of ruthless corporate tactics, now stood before the world's elite as an advocate for ethical business practices. I won't stand here and pretend I've always been on the right side of this issue, Tyler began, his voice steady. I was part of the problem. I prioritized short-term gains over long-term sustainability, profit over people. But thanks to the work of Dr. Alvarez and the leadership of Blackwell Industries, I've seen firsthand that there's a better way. He went on to explain the EBIR program, showing how it could help companies identify and address ethical issues before they became crises. The audience, initially skeptical, by the practical applications of the program. As they concluded their presentation, the room erupted in applause. Questions came flooding in, with attendees eager to learn more about how they could implement similar programs in their own organizations. In the days that followed, Miguel found himself in constant demand. CEOs wanted to discuss partnerships, universities wanted him to speak to their students, and government officials sought his advice on policy matters. One evening, as Miguel was leaving yet another networking event, he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find himself face to face with a familiar figure, Sandra, the executive who had been part of the Blackwell Group at Sapphire Bay Resort. Dr. Alvarez, Sandra said, a wry smile on her face. I thought I might find you here. Miguel blinked in surprise. Sandra, this is unexpected. How have you been? Sandra's smile turned rueful. I've been doing a lot of thinking, actually. Watching you and Tyler up on that stage today, seeing how far Blackwell Industries has come, it made me realize how much I've been stuck in old ways of thinking. She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. I'm not here to ask for a job or anything like that, but I wanted you to know that your work, your message, it's making a difference, even to those of us who might have been skeptical at first. Miguel felt a warmth spread through his chest. This was why he had embarked on this journey, why he had endured months of difficult undercover work and the challenges of corporate change. It was all for moments like this, for the possibility of changing minds and opening hearts. Thank you for telling me this, Sandra, Miguel said sincerely. Change isn't easy, but it's always possible. If you ever want to talk more about implementing some of these ideas in your own work, please don't hesitate to reach out. As Sandra walked away, Miguel felt a sense of completion. The circle that had begun at Sapphire Bay Resort was closing, but new circles were opening all the time, spreading ripples of change across the global business landscape. The final day of the forum arrived, and Miguel found himself on a closing panel alongside some of the most respected names themes in business and academia. As they discussed the future of ethical business practices, Miguel was struck by how much the conversation had shifted just in the few days of the forum. The question is no longer whether ethical business practices are compatible with profitability, one CEO was saying. Thanks to the work of people like Dr. Alvarez and the example set by Blackwell Industries, we now know they are essential for long-term success. The real question is how quickly we can implement these changes across all sectors. As the panel concluded and the forum came to a close, Miguel felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. They had come here to share their message, but they were leaving with so much more. New partnerships, new ideas, and a renewed sense of purpose. On the flight back to New York, Miguel found himself sitting next to Tyler. As the plane took off, Tyler turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "You know, Dr. Alvarez," he said, "when we first met at Sapphire Bay, I thought you were just some waiter who didn't know his place. I couldn't have been more wrong." Miguel smiled, remembering those tense early encounters. "We've both come a long way since then, Tyler." Tyler nodded, his gaze distant. "We have, and I've been thinking there's still so much more we could do. The eBER program is a start, but what if we could create a global network of ethical business advisors, people who could work with companies on the ground in different cultural contexts to implement these practices?" Miguel felt a surge of excitement at the idea. "That could be incredibly powerful, Tyler. It would allow us to scale our impact, to reach companies and communities we might never interact with directly." As they began to sketch out ideas for this new initiative, Miguel marveled at the journey that had brought them to this point. From adversaries to allies, from a luxury resort to the world stage, they had transformed not just their own lives, but had set in motion changes that could reshape the global business landscape. As the plane descended towards New York, Miguel looked out at the glittering city below. He thought about Maria, pursuing her studies in hospitality management and ethics. He thought about Sandra, beginning to question old assumptions and consider new ways of doing business. He thought about all the people he had met at the forum, leaders and decision makers, now armed with new tools and perspectives. The future was far from certain, and there would always be new challenges to face. But as Miguel stepped off the plane, ready to dive back into the work of changing corporate culture from the inside out, he felt a profound sense of hope. They had started a conversation, sparked a move that once seemed unimaginable. And this, Miguel realized, was just the beginning. The real work, the ongoing effort to create a more ethical, culturally sensitive, and sustainable business world was only just starting. But now, they weren't alone in this mission. They had allies around the globe, a growing network of like-minded individuals and organizations committed to doing business better. As he hailed a taxi to take him home, Miguel's mind was already racing with ideas for their next steps. The journey from waiter to chief cultural officer had been extraordinary, but he knew that the most exciting chapters were yet to be written. With each passing day, with each new initiative and partnership, they were getting closer to a world where business could be a force for good, where profit and ethics could go hand in hand. And for Miguel, that was a future worth working towards, no matter the challenges that lay ahead. The months following the World Economic Forum saw a whirlwind of activity at Blackwell Industries. Miguel and Tyler's proposal for a global network of ethical business advisors had gained significant traction, and they found themselves working around the clock to bring this vision to life. One crisp autumn morning, Miguel arrived at the office to find an unexpected visitor waiting for him. Maria, his former co-worker from Sapphire Bay Resort, stood nervously in the reception area, clutching a leather portfolio. "Maria!" Miguel exclaimed, genuinely surprised and delighted. "What are you doing here?" Maria's face broke into a wide smile as she embraced him. "Miguel, or should I say Dr. Alvarez, I hope I'm not intruding. I'm here for an interview." Miguel raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "An interview? For what position?" "For the Global Ethical Business Advisor Program," Maria replied, her eyes shining with excitement. "I've just completed my degree in hospitality management and ethics, thanks in large part to the scholarship from Blackwell Industries. When I heard about this new initiative, I knew I had to apply. A wave of pride washed over Miguel. This was exactly the kind of transformation he had hoped to inspire when he first embarked on his undercover mission at Sapphire Bay. "That's wonderful, Maria. I'm so proud of you. But why didn't you tell me you were applying?" Maria shrugged, a mischievous glint in her eye. "I wanted to surprise you, and I wanted to make sure I got here on my own merits, not because of our connection." Miguel nodded approvingly. "Well, I'm certainly surprised and impressed. Come on, let's get you to that interview." As they walked through the office, Miguel couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them both to this point. From a luxury resort in the Caribbean to the heart of corporate America, they had come so far, yet in many ways, their mission remained the same: to create a more ethical, respectful business world. Miguel left Maria at the interview room, wishing her luck before heading to his own office. He had barely settled in when Tyler burst through the door, his face alight with excitement. "Miguel, you're not going to believe this," Tyler said, waving a tablet in the air. "Remember that mining company we've been trying to get on board with the EBR program, the one with all the labor issues in South America?" Miguel nodded, recalling the challenging negotiations they'd been having with the company's resistant CEO. "Well, they just signed on," Tyler continued. "Full implementation across all their operations. And get this, they want to be part of the pilot program for the Global Advisor Network." Miguel leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. This was a major breakthrough. The mining company had been one of the most significant holdouts, clinging to old exploitative practices. Their change of heart could set a powerful example for the entire industry. "That's incredible news, Tyler," Miguel said. "What changed their minds?" Tyler's grin widened. "Apparently, one of their board members attended our presentation at Davos. He's been pushing for changes ever since, and he finally managed to convince the CEO." As they discussed the implications of this development, Miguel's phone buzzed with a message from Jonathan Blackwell. "My office, ASAP, big news." Exchanging curious glances, Miguel and Tyler made their way to the CEO's suite. They found Blackwell pacing excitedly behind his desk, a news channel playing silently on the wall-mounted screen. "Gentlemen," Blackwell greeted them, his eyes gleaming, "we've done it. The UN Global Compact has just announced a new initiative, U for Ethical Business Practices, and they want Blackwell Industries to lead the corporate partnership program." Miguel and Tyler stood in stunned silence for a moment, the magnitude of this opportunity sinking in. The UN Global Compact was the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative. Their unprecedented legitimacy and reach to the work they'd been doing. "This is an incredible opportunity, sir," Miguel finally managed. "But it's also a huge responsibility. Are we ready for this level of scrutiny and expectation?" Blackwell nodded, his expression turning serious. "It's a fair question, Miguel. We've come a long way, but this will put us under a global microscope. Every decision, every policy, every partnership will be examined and critiqued. But I believe we're ready. More than that, I believe this is our chance to truly change the face of global business." As they delved into the details of the UN partnership, Miguel felt a familiar mix of excitement and trepidation. They were on the cusp of something truly transformative, but the challenges ahead were daunting. Over the next few weeks, the office was a hive of activity as they prepared for the public announcement of the UN partnership. Miguel found himself juggling multiple responsibilities, coordinating with the UN team, refining the Global Advisor program, and managing the growing interest from companies around the world. Amidst the whirlwind of activity, Miguel received another surprise visitor. Sandra, the executive he had encountered at the World Economic Forum, strode into his office one afternoon, a determined look on her face. "Dr. Alvarez," she said, taking a seat without waiting for an invitation. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since we last spoke, and I've made a decision. I want in." Miguel raised an eyebrow. Intrigued. "In on what exactly?" Sandra leaned forward, her eyes intense. "All of it. The ethical business practices, the cultural sensitivity training, the Global Advisor program. I've left my old company, and I want to be part of what you're building here." For a moment, Miguel was speechless. Sandra had been one of the most skeptical executives during his time at Sapphire Bay. Her transformation was a powerful testament to the impact of their work. "I'm glad to hear that, Sandra," Miguel said carefully. "But I have have to ask, why the change of heart? Sandra's expression softened slightly. Honestly, it was seeing you and Tyler at Davos, seeing how you'd both changed, how you'd taken your experiences and used them to create real positive change. It made me realize how stuck I'd been in old ways of thinking. She paused, collecting her thoughts. But it was more than that. I started looking at the data, at the success stories coming out of companies that had adopted these practices. And I realized that this isn't just some feel-good initiative. It's the future of business. Miguel nodded slowly, a smile spreading across his face. Well, Sandra, I think we might have just the place for you. How do you feel about joining our team of global ethical business advisors? As Sandra left his office with a spring in her step and a stack of onboarding documents, Miguel couldn't help but marvel at the strange turns his life had taken. Former adversaries were now allies, and the principles he had fought so hard to defend were becoming mainstream in the corporate world. The day of the UN Global Compact announcement arrived, bringing with it a media frenzy. Miguel found himself standing alongside Jonathan Blackwell and a group of UN officials, facing a sea of cameras and reporters. As Blackwell made the official announcement outlining the partnership and the ambitious goals they had set, Miguel scanned the crowd. He spotted familiar faces, colleagues and rivals alike, all watching with rapt attention. But it was the unfamiliar faces that truly caught his eye. The young interns and junior executives who looked on with hope and excitement. They were the future of business, the ones who would carry this work forward. When it was Miguel's turn to speak, he stepped up to the microphone, feeling the weight of the moment. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice steady and clear. A little over 2 years ago, I was working as a waiter in a luxury resort, witnessing firsthand the casual cruelty and ethical blindness that often characterizes interactions between powerful corporations and local communities. Today, I stand before you as the Chief Cultural Officer of Blackwell Industries, partnering with the United Nations to reshape the global business landscape. He paused, letting his words sink in. This journey has taught me many things, but perhaps the most important is this: change is possible. No matter how entrenched old ways of thinking might seem, no matter how insurmountable the challenges appear, with dedication, empathy, and a commitment to doing what's right, we can create a business world that uplifts rather than exploits, that unites rather than divides. As Miguel continued his speech, outlining their plans for the Global Advisor Network and the expansion of the EBIR program, he could see the impact his words were having. Reporters leaned forward, scribbling furiously. Executives nodded thoughtfully. In the days and weeks that followed the announcement, Blackwell Industries found itself at the center of a global conversation about the future of ethical business. Requests for interviews and partnerships poured in from around the world. Companies that had once been resistant to change were now clamoring to be part of the movement. Amidst the flurry of activity, Miguel received an unexpected call. It was from the dean of the business school at his old university in Havana, Dr. Alvarez. The dean said, his voice warm with pride. I hope I'm not interrupting anything too crucial. Miguel smiled, remembering his days as a young professor, full of ideas but unsure how to implement them. Not at all, Dean Ramirez. It's good to hear from you. What can I do for you? The dean chuckled. Actually, Miguel, it's about what you can do for us. We've been following your work closely, and we'd like to invite you to give a series of lectures on ethical business practices and cultural sensitivity in the global marketplace. Miguel felt a surge of emotion to return to where it all began, to share what he had learned with a new generation of students. It felt like coming full circle. I'd be honored, Dean Ramirez, Miguel said, his voice thick with gratitude. When do you want me to start? As he hung up the phone, Miguel's mind was already racing with ideas for his lectures. He wanted to share not just the theoretical frameworks and best practices they had developed, but the real human stories that had shaped his understanding of ethical business. The next few months saw Miguel splitting his time between his duties at Blackwell Industries, his work with the UN Global Compact, and his new role as a visiting lecturer. It was a grueling schedule, but Miguel found himself energized by the opportunity to shape young minds and influence the next generation of business leaders. One evening, as Miguel was preparing for his final lecture of the semester, he received a video call from Tyler. The former executive's face filled the screen, his expression a mix of excitement and nervousness. "Miguel," Tyler said, running, a hand through his hair. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I'm in Ghana, working with that mining company we signed on a few months ago." Miguel nodded, remembering the breakthrough they had made with the once resistant company. "How's it going, Tyler? Any progress?" Tyler's face broke into a wide grin. "Progress? Miguel, it's incredible. We've implemented the eBay program across all their operations, and the results are already showing. Worker satisfaction is up, safety, incidents are down, and get this, productivity has actually increased." Miguel felt a warmth spread through his chest. This was what it was all about. Real, tangible improvements in people's lives. Tyler continued, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "But that's not why I'm calling. I've been talking with the local community leaders, and we've come up with an idea for a new initiative. We want to establish a training program for local youth, teaching them not just the technical skills for mining operations, but also the principles of ethical business and cultural intelligence." As Tyler outlined the plan, Miguel found himself nodding along, his mind already racing with possibilities. This was the kind of grassroots initiative that could create lasting change, empowering local communities to take control of their economic futures. "It sounds amazing, Tyler," Miguel said when his colleague had finished. "What do you need from me?" Tyler's expression turned serious. "Your blessing, for one, and maybe your help in securing some additional funding from Blackwell Industries. I really think this could be a game changer, Miguel, not just for this community, but as a model we could replicate in other regions." Miguel didn't hesitate. "You have my full support, Tyler. Send me the proposal and I'll take it to Blackwell first thing in the morning. And Tyler, I'm proud of you. You've come a long way." As the video call ended, Miguel sat back in his chair, a sense of satisfaction washing over him. This was what he had dreamed of when he first embarked on his undercover mission at Sapphire Bay Resort, not just changing policies or implementing programs, but fundamentally shifting the way businesses interacted with the world. The next morning, Miguel strode into Jonathan Blackwell's office, Tyler's proposal in hand. As he outlined the plan for the youth training program in Ghana, he could see the CEO's eyes light up with interest. "This is exactly the kind of initiative we should be supporting," Blackwell said when Miguel had finished. "It's not just about avoiding harm or meeting minimum standards. It's about actively contributing to the communities we work in, about creating opportunities and empowering people." Blackwell leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know, Miguel, Chief Cultural Officer, I had high hopes, but I have to admit you've exceeded every expectation. You've not only transformed our company, but you've started a movement that's changing the entire business world." Miguel felt a wave of emotion wash over him. "Thank you, sir, but it's not just me. It's everyone who's embraced these ideas, who's been willing to challenge old assumptions and try a new way of doing things. People like Tyler, like Maria, like all the employees who've committed to this vision." Blackwell nodded, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Indeed, and speaking of vision, I have a proposition for you, Miguel. How would you feel about taking on a new role? I'm thinking of creating a position of Global Ethics and Sustainability Officer, overseeing not just our internal practices, but our partnerships and initiatives around the world." For a moment, Miguel was speechless. It was an incredible opportunity, a chance to expand his influence and drive change on an even larger scale. But as he considered the offer, he realized that his true passion lay not in climbing the corporate ladder, but in continuing to bridge the gap between academia and business, between theory and practice. "Mr. Blackwell," Miguel said slowly, "I'm honored by the offer, but I think I can do more good in my current role, continuing to develop our programs and train the next generation of ethical business leaders. If it's all right with you, I'd like to split my time between Blackwell Industries and teaching, perhaps taking on some additional speaking engagements to spread our message even further." Blackwell studied him for a moment, then broke into a wide grin. "I had a feeling you might say something like that, Miguel, and I couldn't agree more. Your ability to connect with people, to translate these complex ideas into practical action, that's what makes you so valuable. Consider it done." As Miguel left Blackwell's office, his mind was already racing with ideas for new initiatives, new partnerships, new ways to spread the message of ethical business practices. He thought about Maria, now thriving as part of the Global Advisor Network. He thought about Sandra, using her insider knowledge of corporate politics to help other companies navigate the transition to more ethical practices. He thought about Tyler working on the ground in Ghana to create real, lasting change. And he thought about himself, the journey that had brought him from a quiet professor in Havana to the heart of a global movement for ethical business. It hadn't been an easy path, and there were still challenges ahead. But as Miguel looked out over the New York skyline, he felt a profound sense of purpose and hope. The world was changing, slowly but surely, and he was playing a part in shaping that change. One conversation, one decision, one transformed mind at a time. As he turned back to his office, ready to dive into the next challenge, Miguel knew that the most exciting chapters of this journey were still to come. 5 years had passed since Miguel's fateful undercover mission at Sapphire Bay Resort, and the world of business had undergone a remarkable transformation. The ethical practices and cultural sensitivity initiatives pioneered by Blackwell Industries had spread far and wide, influencing companies across the globe. Miguel found himself at the center of this movement, splitting his time between his role at Blackwell, teaching at various universities, and speaking at international conferences. On a crisp autumn morning, Miguel stood at the podium in a packed auditorium at Harvard Business School. The eager faces of MBA students looked up at him, many furiously taking notes as he spoke about the practical applications of ethical business practices in a globalized economy. "Remember," Miguel said, his voice carrying to the back of the room, "ethical business isn't just about avoiding wrongdoing. It's about actively seeking ways to create positive impact. It's about understanding that long-term success is built on trust, respect, and mutual benefit." As he concluded his lecture, a forest of hands shot up for the Q&A session. Miguel smiled, recognizing the hunger for knowledge in these future business leaders. It was a far cry from the cynical, profit-at-all-costs mentality that had once dominated business education. "Dr. Alvarez," one student asked, "how do you respond to critics who say that ethical business practices are a luxury that only large, established companies can afford?" Miguel nodded, appreciating the thoughtful question. "It's a common misconception, but our research has consistently shown that ethical practices are not just viable for businesses of all sizes. They're often a competitive advantage. Small companies that prioritize ethics and sustainability often find it easier to attract top talent, build customer loyalty, and access new markets." He went on to share examples of small businesses that had thrived, from a fair trade coffee cooperative in Colombia to a sustainable fashion startup in Bangladesh. The students listened intently, many nodding as they saw the real-world applications of the principles Miguel was teaching. As the lecture ended and students filed out, many stopping to shake Miguel's hand or ask additional questions, he felt a familiar sense of satisfaction. This was why he had chosen to continue teaching alongside his work at Blackwell Industries. Each mind opened, each future business leader inspired to think differently, was a victory in the ongoing battle for a more ethical business world. Miguel's phone buzzed as he packed up his materials. It was a message from Tyler. "Big news from Ghana. Can we video chat later?" Intrigued, Miguel quickly responded, agreeing to a call that evening. Tyler's work in Ghana had become a shining example of how businesses could positively impact local communities. The youth training program they had started 5 years ago had grown into a comprehensive education and entrepreneurship initiative that was transforming the region. Later that evening, back in his New York apartment, Miguel connected with Tyler via video call. The years had been kind to Tyler, the former cutthroat executive, now exuding a sense of purpose and contentment that came from meaningful work. "Miguel," Tyler began, his face split by a wide grin, "you're not going to believe this. Remember that first group of students we trained in ethical mining practices and business management?" Miguel nodded, recalling the excited reports Tyler had sent about the program's early successes. "Well," Tyler continued, "they've just secured funding to start their own mining company. But here's the kicker, it's not just any mining company. They're focusing on reclaiming and rehabilitating old mine sites, using sustainable practices and cutting-edge technology." Miguel felt a surge of pride and excitement excitement. This was exactly the kind of long-term transformative impact they had hoped to achieve. That's incredible, Tyler. How did they manage to secure the funding? Tyler's grin widened. That's the best part. It's a mix of local investors, international development funds, and get this, some of the major mining companies we've worked with through the EBR program. They're not just investing money, but also providing mentorship and technical support. As Tyler shared more details about the new venture, Miguel found himself marveling at how far they had come. What had started as an undercover research project had spiraled into a global movement, creating ripples of change that were now turning into waves. Tyler, Miguel said when his colleague had finished his update, I hope you realize what an incredible thing you've helped create here. This is the future we dreamed of, where ethical business practices don't just prevent harm, but actively create opportunities and empower communities. Tyler's expression turned serious. I do realize it, Miguel, and I can't help but think about where I was when we first met, the kind of businessman I used to be. I owe you a debt I can never repay. Miguel shook his head. You don't owe me anything, Tyler. You made the choice to change, to use your skills and knowledge for good. If anything, I owe you for showing the world that real, profound change is possible, even in the most unlikely places. After ending the call with Tyler, Miguel sat back in his chair, reflecting on the journey that had brought them all to this point. He thought about Maria, who had recently been promoted to lead Blackwell's Global Cultural Sensitivity Training Program. He thought about Sandra, now a respected consultant helping companies navigate the transition to more ethical practices. His reflections were interrupted by another message, this one from Jonathan Blackwell. Miguel, need to discuss something important. Breakfast tomorrow? Curious and slightly apprehensive, Miguel agreed to meet Blackwell at their usual breakfast spot, a small cafe near the Blackwell Industries headquarters. The next morning, as Miguel slid into the booth across from Blackwell, he was struck by the CEO's serious expression. Good morning, Mr. Blackwell. Is everything all right? Blackwell managed a small smile. Everything's fine, Miguel. More than fine, actually. But we have a situation that I need your input on. As their coffee arrived, Blackwell leaned in, his voice low. We've been approached by a major tech company, one of our biggest competitors. They want to merge with Blackwell Industries. Miguel felt a jolt of surprise. A merger of this scale would be big news in the business world. I see. And what are your thoughts on this, sir? Blackwell sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. Financially, it makes a lot of sense. The synergies between our companies could create a lot of value, but I'm concerned about our ethical standards, our company culture. I'm not sure practices. Miguel nodded, understanding the dilemma. Have they given any indication of how they would approach these issues post-merger? They've made some promises, Blackwell said, a note of skepticism in his voice. But I'm not convinced. That's why I wanted to talk to you. I need your honest opinion, Miguel. Do we go ahead with this merger and try to influence them from the inside, or do we stay independent and continue to lead by example? Miguel sat back, considering the question carefully. It was a complex issue, with valid arguments on both sides. On one hand, merging with a larger company could provide them with more resources and a bigger platform to promote ethical business practices. On the other hand, there was a risk of their values being diluted or compromised in a larger corporate structure. Mr. Blackwell, Miguel said finally, I think we need to approach this the same way we approach all our ethical decisions, by considering the long-term impact on all stakeholders. If we believe we can truly influence this company and bring them up to our standards, then the merger could be a powerful way to expand our impact. He paused, then continued. However, we would need ironclad agreements in place to ensure our ethical practices are maintained and expanded throughout the merged company. We would also need to be prepared to walk away if we see any signs of our values being compromised. Blackwell nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. And what about our employees, our partners? How do you think they would react? And to this merger, Miguel considered this for a moment. I think there would be concerns. Naturally, we've built a strong culture of ethics and sustainability, and people might fear losing that. We would need to communicate very clearly about our intentions and involve our employees employees and partners in the process as much as possible. As they continued to discuss the potential merger, weighing the pros and cons, Miguel found himself reflecting on how far they had come. 5 years ago, the idea of a major tech company wanting to merge with Blackwell Industries, primarily because of its ethical practices, would have seemed far-fetched. Now, it was a testament to how much the business world had changed, and the role they had played in that change. By the end of their breakfast, Blackwell seemed to have come to a decision. "All right, Miguel, I think we should explore this merger further, but with extreme caution. I want you to be closely involved in the negotiations. Your perspective will be crucial in ensuring our values are protected and expanded." Miguel nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility. "I understand, sir. I'll do my best to ensure that any agreement we reach stays true to our principles." As he left the cafe, Miguel's mind was already racing with ideas and strategies. This potential merger represented both a huge opportunity and a significant challenge. It would require all the skills and knowledge he had accumulated over the years, from his academic background to his undercover experience to his years working in corporate ethics. Over the next few months, Miguel found himself deep in merger negotiations, working long hours alongside Blackwell and a team of lawyers and executives. It was challenging work, often frustrating as they pushed for stronger ethical commitments and encountered resistance from the other company. One particularly tense meeting stood out in Miguel's memory. He was facing off against the other company's CEO, a hard-nosed businessman of the old school. "Look," the CEO said, his voice tinged with exasperation, "we've agreed to implement your ethical guidelines and cultural sensitivity training. What more do you want?" Miguel leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "It's not just about implementing guidelines or conducting training, sir. It's about fundamentally changing the way we do business. We need a commitment that ethical considerations will be at the forefront of every major decision, that sustainability and community impact will be key performance indicators alongside profit." The CEO scoffed. "That's all well and good, Dr. Alvarez, but we're running a business here, not a charity. We have shareholders to answer to." Miguel nodded, having anticipated this argument. "I understand that, which is why I've prepared this report." He slid a document across the table. "It outlines the financial benefits our ethical practices have brought to Blackwell Industries over the past 5 years. Increased employee retention, stronger customer loyalty, access to new markets, reduced legal and reputational risks. The numbers speak for themselves." As the CEO and his team pored over the report, Miguel could see the shift in their expressions. The data was compelling, showing in black and white that ethical business practices weren't just morally right, but financially smart. The negotiations continued proved to be a turning point. Slowly but surely, they hammered out an agreement that satisfied both companies' needs while enshrining Blackwell's ethical standards as a core part of the merged entity's identity. Finally, after months of intense work, the merger agreement was ready. As Miguel sat in the boardroom, watching Jonathan Blackwell and the other CEOs sign the documents, he felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. They had done it. They had found a way to expand their influence and resources while staying true to their principles. As the room erupted in applause, Blackwell caught Miguel's eye and gave him a nod of appreciation. They both knew that the real work was just beginning. Implementing these ethical standards across a much larger, more diverse company would be a significant challenge, but it was a challenge they were ready to face. In the weeks that followed the merger announcement, Miguel found himself busier than ever. He was overseeing the integration of Blackwell's ethical practices into the larger company, conducting training sessions for new employees, and fielding endless questions from the media about how this merger would impact their commitment to responsible business. One afternoon, as Miguel was preparing for yet another integration meeting, he received an unexpected visitor. Maria, now the head of global cultural sensitivity training, knocked on his office door. "Miguel," she said, a mix of excitement and nervousness in her voice, "do you have a moment?" "For you, always," Miguel replied with a smile, gesturing for her to take a seat. "What's on your mind?" Maria sat down, taking a deep breath before speaking. "I've been thinking a lot about our work here, about about how far we've come since those days at Sapphire Bay Resort, and I've realized something. There's still so much more we could be doing. Miguel leaned forward, intrigued. What do you mean? Well, Maria continued, her words coming faster now. We've made great strides in the corporate world, but what about small businesses? What about entrepreneurs in developing countries who want to build ethical businesses but don't have access to the resources and knowledge we have? Miguel nodded, seeing where she was going. You're right, that's a gap we haven't fully addressed yet. Maria's eyes lit up. Exactly. So I have a proposal. What if we created a foundation, separate from the company but supported by it, focused on promoting ethical business practices among small enterprises and startups in developing regions? As Maria outlined her idea, Miguel felt a surge of pride and excitement. This was exactly the kind of initiative he had hoped to inspire when he first started this journey. It was a way to extend their impact beyond the corporate world, to touch the lives of people who might never interact directly with their company. Maria, this is brilliant, Miguel said when she had finished. I think you're onto something really important here. Have you discussed this with Mr. Blackwell yet? Maria shook her head. No, I wanted to get your thoughts first. Do you think he'd be open to it? Miguel smiled. I think he'll love it. In fact, let's go talk to him right now. As they walked to Blackwell's office, Miguel couldn't help but reflect on how far Maria had come. From a frustrated resort worker to a corporate executive proposing global initiatives, her journey was a powerful testament to the transformative potential of ethical business practices. Blackwell listened intently as Maria presented her idea, his expression growing more enthusiastic by the minute. When she finished, he turned to Miguel with a grin. Well, Miguel, it seems your influence is still creating waves. This is exactly the kind of initiative we should be supporting. He turned back to Maria. I love it. Let's set up a meeting with the board to discuss funding and implementation. As they left Blackwell's office, Maria turned to Miguel, her eyes shining with excitement. I can't believe it. We're really going to do this. Miguel squeezed her shoulder affectionately. You're really going to do this, Maria. This is your brainchild, and I have no doubt you're the right person to lead it. Over the next few months, as the dust settled from the merger and Maria's foundation began to take shape, Miguel found himself reflecting more and more on the journey that had brought them all to this point. From his undercover days at Sapphire Bay Resort to the halls of corporate power, from academic theories to real-world applications, it had been an extraordinary ride. One evening, as Miguel was working late in his office, he received an unexpected video call. It was from the manager of Sapphire Bay Resort, the very place where this all began. Dr. Alvarez, the manager said, a warm smile on his face. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Miguel shook his head, curious about the reason for the call. Not at all. How can I help you? Actually, I'm calling to thank you. The changes you set in motion, the ethical practices and cultural sensitivity training, they've transformed this place. Our employee satisfaction is at an all-time high, and we're seeing a new kind of tourist, one who values authentic cultural experiences and responsible travel. As the manager continued to share the positive changes at the resort, Miguel felt a warmth spread through his chest. This was why he had done it all, why he had endured months of difficult undercover work and years of corporate challenges. It was all for moments like this, for the real, tangible improvements in people's lives. After ending the call, Miguel stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the New York skyline. He thought about all the people who had been part of this journey, from Maria and Tyler to Sandra and Jonathan Blackwell. He thought about the students he had taught, the business leaders he had influenced, the communities that had been impacted by their work. And he thought about himself, the quiet professor from Havana who had taken a risk to study a problem and ended up becoming part of the solution. The journey had been long and often difficult, but as Miguel looked out at the city lights, he knew that it had all been worth it. The world of business was changing, slowly but surely. Ethical practices were no longer seen as a luxury or a burden, but as a crucial component of long-term success. Cultural sensitivity was becoming a valued skill, not just a buzzword, and companies were beginning to see themselves not just as profit-generating entities, but as integral parts of the communities they served. There was still much work to be done, many challenges to overcome, but as Miguel turned back to his desk, ready to dive into the next project, he felt a profound sense of hope and purpose. The seeds they had planted were growing, spreading, creating a new kind of business world, one that valued people survival as much as profits, sustainability as much as growth. And for Miguel, that was a future worth working towards, no matter the challenges that lay ahead. The journey that had begun with a simple undercover assignment had turned into a lifelong mission, one that was changing the face of global business, one ethical decision at a time. 10 years had passed since Miguel's undercover mission at Sapphire. Bay Resort and the world of business had undergone a remarkable transformation. Ethical practices and cultural sensitivity were no longer niche concerns, but mainstream expectations. Blackwell Industries, now part of a larger conglomerate following the merger, had become a global leader in responsible business practices. On a warm spring morning, Miguel found himself back at Sapphire Bay Resort, this time as a keynote speaker for an international conference on ethical tourism. As he walked through the familiar grounds, memories of his time as an undercover waiter flooded back. The resort had changed significantly, reflecting the shift towards more responsible and culturally sensitive practices. Miguel paused by the pool where he had once served drinks to oblivious tourists. Now, signs in multiple languages explained the resort's commitment to environmental sustainability and cultural preservation. Local artisans displayed their crafts in a dedicated marketplace, and informational plaques educated guests about the region's history and ecology. As he made his way to the conference center, Miguel was stopped by a young woman in a resort uniform. "Dr. Alvarez, I'm sorry to bother you, but I just wanted to say thank you. Your work has made such a difference." "Here," Miguel smiled warmly. "Thank you. What's your name?" "Amelia," she replied. "I'm studying hospitality management, and your story inspired me to focus on ethical tourism practices." This brief encounter reminded Miguel of why he had embarked on this journey in the first place. It wasn't just about changing corporate policies, it was about inspiring individuals to make a difference in their own spheres of influence. Inside the conference center, Miguel was greeted by a diverse group of attendees ranging from hotel managers to eco-tourism entrepreneurs to government officials. The excitement in the air was palpable, a stark contrast to the cynicism that had once dominated discussions about business ethics. As Miguel took the stage, he looked out over the audience, feeling a sense of both accomplishment and humility. 10 years ago, he began, I stood in this very resort, not as a respected speaker, but as a waiter, witnessing firsthand the casual cruelty and ethical blindness that often characterize the tourism industry. Today, I stand before you as living proof that change is possible, that ethical business practices are not just morally right, but economically smart. Over the next hour, Miguel shared the journey that had brought him and the business world to this point. He spoke of the challenges they had and the victories, both small and large, that had marked their progress. He highlighted the work of people like Maria, whose foundation was now empowering small businesses across the developing world to adopt ethical practices. But our work is far from over, Miguel continued, his voice taking on a note of urgency. As we celebrate our progress, we must also acknowledge the new challenges that lie ahead. Climate change, technological disruption, growing inequality. These are issues that demand an ethical response from the business world. He went on to outline his vision for the next decade of ethical business evolution. It was a vision that went beyond mere compliance or risk management, envisioning businesses as active partners in solving global challenges. As Miguel concluded his speech, the room erupted in applause. Questions came flooding in, with attendees eager to learn more about how they could implement these ideas in their own organizations. Miguel felt a familiar surge of energy, the same excitement that had driven him throughout his journey. After the conference session ended, Miguel found himself surrounded by a group of young entrepreneurs, all eager to share their ideas and seek his advice. One young woman, her eyes shining with enthusiasm, described her plans for a community-based tourism project in her native village. "That sounds like an excellent initiative," Miguel said, genuinely impressed. "Have you considered partnering with Maria's foundation? They specialize in supporting exactly this kind of ethical entrepreneurship." As he provided contact information and advice to the young entrepreneurs, Miguel couldn't help but feel a sense of optimism about the future. These were the leaders of tomorrow, and they were starting their careers with a strong ethical foundation. Later that evening, as Miguel walked along the beach, reflecting on the day's events, he spotted a familiar face. It was Tyler, looking relaxed and content as he strolled along the water's edge. "Tyler!" Miguel called out, waving to his old colleague and friend. Tyler's face broke into a wide grin as he jogged over. "Miguel, I thought I might run into you here. How did your speech go?" As they fell into step together, Miguel filled Tyler in on the conference. "It's incredible to see how far we've come," he concluded. "But what brings you here? Last I heard, you were still in Ghana." Tyler nodded, his expression turning thoughtful. "I was, but I've recently taken on a new role. I'm heading up a new initiative to apply the lessons we learned in Ghana to other regions. We're looking at setting up similar programs in Southeast Asia and South America." Miguel felt a surge of pride for his friend. Tyler's journey from cutthroat executive to ethical business leader was a powerful testament to the possibility of change. "That's fantastic, Tyler. If anyone can make it work, it's you." As they continued their walk, discussing the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead, Miguel was struck by how natural it felt. Here they were, two men who had once been on opposite sides of an ethical divide, now united in their commitment to responsible business practices. Their conversation was interrupted by the buzz of Miguel's phone. It was a message from Maria. "Big news! The foundation just secured major funding for our microfinance program. Call me when you can." Miguel smiled, showing the message to Tyler. "Looks like the good news keeps coming," he said. Tyler nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. "It's amazing how things snowball once you get the ball rolling. One ethical decision leads to another, and before you know it, you're changing the world." As they parted ways, promising to catch up properly over dinner the next day, Miguel felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The seeds they had planted over the past decade were not just growing, they were flourishing, spreading in ways they could never have anticipated. The next morning, Miguel woke early, energized despite the long day before. He had arranged to meet with the resort's management team to discuss further improvements to their ethical practices. As he made his way to the meeting room, he overheard a conversation between two employees that made him pause. "I'm telling you," one was saying, "since we implemented those new policies, my job satisfaction has gone through the roof. I actually look forward to coming to work now." The other nodded enthusiastically. "I know what you mean. And have you noticed how the guests have changed too? They seem more interested in learning about our culture, more respectful." Miguel smiled to himself as he continued on his way. These small, everyday changes were just as important as the big policy shifts. They were the real measure of how much progress had been made. The meeting with the management team was productive, with everyone eager to build on their successes and address ongoing challenges. By their proactive approach to environmental sustainability, including plans for a coral reef restoration project. As the meeting wrapped up, the resort's general manager pulled Miguel aside. "Dr. Alvarez, I can't thank you enough for all you've done. You know, when I first heard about your undercover work here, I was skeptical. I thought it was just another academic study that would gather dust on a shelf, but you've truly transformed this industry." Miguel felt a warmth spread through his chest. "Thank you, but it wasn't just me. It was everyone who was willing to listen, to change, to take a stand for what's right. You and your team have done the hard work of implementing these changes day in and day out." After the meeting, Miguel decided to take a walk around the resort grounds. He wanted to see firsthand how things had changed since his time as an undercover waiter. As he strolled through the lush gardens, he noticed informational signs about local plant species and their traditional uses. Near the beach, a group of guests was participating in a workshop on traditional fishing techniques led by a local expert. These small touches brought a smile to Miguel's face. They represented a shift from treating local culture as mere background scenery to actively engaging with and respecting it. It was a far cry from the casual dismissal of local customs he had witnessed a decade ago. As he rounded a corner, Miguel came face to face with a group of staff members on their break. For a moment, he was transported back in time, remembering the frustrations and indignities he had shared with his fellow workers during his undercover days. One of the staff members, an older man with kind eyes, stepped forward. "Dr. Alvarez, I'm sorry to bother you, but I just wanted to say thank you. I've been working here for over 20 years years, and the changes you set in motion, they've made a real difference in our lives." Miguel was touched by the man's words. "Thank you for sharing that with me. If you don't mind me asking, what's been the biggest change from your perspective?" The man thought for a moment. "Respect," he said finally. "We feel respected now, by management and by the guests. Our culture, our knowledge, it's valued, and that makes all the difference." As Miguel continued his walk, he reflected on the man's words. Respect, dignity, these were the fundamental principles that had driven his work from the beginning. It was gratifying to see how these abstract concepts had translated into real, tangible improvements in people's lives. Later that afternoon, Miguel finally had a chance to call Maria and hear about her foundation's latest success. As she excitedly filled him in on the details of the new microfinance program, Miguel felt a surge of pride. Maria had come so far from the frustrated resort worker he had first met. "That's incredible news, Maria," he said when she had finished. "You've built something truly remarkable." Maria's voice softened. "I couldn't have done it without you, Miguel. You showed me that change was possible, that one person really could make a difference." After ending the call, Miguel sat back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. Maria's words had struck a chord. When he had first embarked on his undercover mission, he had hoped to gather data, to shed light on the problems in the tourism industry. He had never imagined that his actions would spark a movement that would transform not just one resort or one company, but the entire landscape of global business. That evening, Miguel met Tyler for dinner at a small, locally owned restaurant near the beach. As they settled into their seats, Miguel couldn't help but marvel at the strange turns their lives had taken. "You know, Tyler," he said, "if someone had told me 10 years ago that we'd be sitting here like this, I would have thought they were crazy." Tyler laughed, shaking his head. "You and me both. I was so focused on climbing the corporate ladder, on winning at all costs, I couldn't see the bigger picture." As they enjoyed their meal, prepared with locally sourced ingredients and traditional recipes, they reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. They spoke of the challenges they had faced, the moments of doubt, the small victories that had kept them going. "You know what I'm most proud of?" Tyler said, his expression turning serious. "It's not the programs we've implemented or the awards we've won. It's the people whose lives we've touched. The young people in Ghana who now have opportunities they never dreamed of. The employees who feel valued and respected, the communities that are thriving because of ethical business practices." Miguel nodded, understanding completely. "That's what it's all about, isn't it? Making a real positive difference in people's lives." As they finished their meal, the conversation turned to the future. Both men were acutely aware that there were still significant challenges ahead. "Climate change is the big one," Miguel said, his brow furrowing. "We need to find ways to make sustainability not just a nice to have, but a fundamental part of every business model." Tyler agreed. "And then there's the issue of technology. AI, automation, they're going to transform the job market. We need to ensure that these changes are implemented ethically, with consideration for the human cost." They continued to discuss these challenges long into the night, brainstorming ideas and strategies. Despite the magnitude of the issues they faced, both men felt a sense of optimism. They had seen firsthand how much could be accomplished when people committed to doing the right thing. As they finally said their goodbyes, promising to stay in touch and collaborate on future projects, Miguel felt a renewed sense of purpose. The work was far from over, but they had built a strong foundation for the next phase of ethical business evolution. The next morning, as Miguel prepared to leave Sapphire Bay Resort, he took one last walk along the beach. The sun was just rising, painting the sky in brilliant hues of pink and gold. He watched as the resort staff began to set up for the day, their movements efficient but unhurried, their demeanor relaxed and confident. In the distance, he could see a group of guests participating in a beach cleanup, led by one of the local environmental experts. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it represented a fundamental shift in how tourism operated, with visitors becoming active participants in preserving the places they visited. As Miguel turned to head back to his room, he spotted Amelia, the young hospitality student he had met on his first day. She was talking talking animatedly with a group of guests, explaining something about the local marine ecosystem. Catching his eye, Amelia waved him over. "Dr. Alvarez, I was just telling these guests about your work. They're very interested in learning more about ethical tourism practices." For the next half hour, Miguel found himself engaged in a lively discussion with the guests, answering questions and sharing insights. He was struck by their genuine interest and their desire to be responsible travelers. As he finally said goodbye and headed to check out, Miguel felt a profound sense of hope for the future. The guests he had just spoken with, Amelia with her passion for ethical hospitality, the staff members proud of their culture and their work. These were all signs of a fundamental shift in how business operated and how people engaged with the world. Boarding his flight back to New York, Miguel's mind was already racing with ideas for his next projects. There was still so much work to be done, so many challenges to address. But as the plane took off, giving him a bird's-eye view of the beautiful coastline, he felt ready to face whatever came next. The journey that had begun with a simple undercover assignment had turned into a lifelong mission, one that was changing the face of global business, one ethical decision at a time. And for Miguel, that was a future worth working towards, no matter the challenges that lay ahead. As Miguel's plane touched down in New York, he felt a familiar surge of energy. The visit to Sapphire Bay Resort had reinvigorated him, reminding him of how far they had come and how much was still left to do. He was eager to dive back into his work, to continue pushing the boundaries of ethical business practices. The next morning, Miguel arrived at Blackwell Industries headquarters early. As he walked through the bustling lobby, he noticed a new addition, a large digital display showcasing real-time data on the company's ethical initiatives, from carbon footprint reduction to community impact metrics. It was a visible reminder of how central these values had become to the company's identity. In his office, Miguel found a stack of reports waiting for him. As he began to sift through them, his assistant, Sarah, knocked on the door. "Good morning, Dr. Alvarez," she said, a hint of excitement in her voice. "Mr. Blackwell would like to see you in the conference room. He says it's urgent." Intrigued, Miguel made his way to the conference room. Inside, he found Jonathan Blackwell, along with several other executives, all gathered around a large screen. Blackwell's face broke into a wide grin when he saw Miguel. "Ah, Miguel, perfect timing. We've just received some news that I think you'll find very interesting." As Miguel took a seat, Blackwell pulled up a news article on the screen. The headline read, "United Nations launches Global Ethical Business Initiative, cites Blackwell Industries as model." Miguel felt a jolt of excitement as he scanned the article. The UN was launching a comprehensive program to promote ethical business practices worldwide, and they were using Blackwell Industries' journey as a case study and model for other companies. His mind already racing with the possibilities. "It's an opportunity to scale our impact far beyond what we could achieve on our own." Blackwell nodded, his expression turning serious. "Exactly, and that's why I've called this meeting. The UN has asked us to play a leading role in this initiative. They want us to share our experiences, our successes and failures to help other companies make this transition." As the meeting progressed, they discussed the implications of this new development. It would require a significant commitment of time and resources, but the potential impact was enormous. They could help shape global business practices on a scale they had never before imagined. "There's one more thing," Blackwell said as the meeting was wrapping up. "The UN wants a representative from Blackwell to serve on the advisory board for this initiative. I think you're the perfect person for the job, Miguel." Miguel felt a mix of honor and trepidation. It was a huge responsibility, but also an incredible opportunity to further the cause he had dedicated his life to. "I'd be honored, Mr. Blackwell. Thank you for your trust." As he left the conference room, Miguel's mind was already whirling with ideas. This UN initiative could be the tipping point they had been working towards, the moment when ethical business practices became the norm rather than the exception. Over the next few weeks, Miguel threw himself into preparing for his new role with the UN initiative. He worked closely with Maria to ensure that the perspectives of small businesses and entrepreneurs in developing countries were represented. He consulted with Tyler about the challenges of implementing ethical practices in different cultural contexts. One afternoon, as Miguel was reviewing the draft of his first presentation to the UN Advisory Board, he received an unexpected visitor. Sandra, the former executive who had once been skeptical of their ethical initiatives, knocked on his office door. "Dr. Alvarez?" she said, a hint of nervousness in her voice. "Do you have a moment?" Miguel welcomed her in, curious about what had brought her to his office. Sandra had become a strong advocate for ethical business practices in recent years, but they didn't often have occasion to speak one-on-one. "I heard about your appointment to the UN Advisory Board," Sandra began. "Congratulations. It's well deserved." "Thank you, Sandra," Miguel replied, "but something tells me that's not why you're here." Sandra nodded, taking a deep breath. "You're right. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about my role in all of this, about the person I used to be and the person I want to be." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "I was wondering if you might need any help with the UN initiative. I know I'm not the obvious choice, given my past, but I think that might actually be an asset. I understand the mindset of those who are resistant to these changes, because I used to be one of them." Miguel leaned back in his chair, considering Sandra's words. She had a point. Her journey from skeptic to advocate could be a powerful testimony to the viability and importance of ethical business practices. "I think you might be onto something, Sandra," Miguel said slowly. "Your perspective could be invaluable, especially when it comes to convincing other executives who might be hesitant about making these changes." Sandra's face lit up with relief and excitement. "Really? You mean it?" Miguel nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "Absolutely. In fact, I have an idea. We're putting together a series of case studies for the UN initiative. Would you be willing to share your story, to talk about your journey and what you've learned along the way?" "I'd be honored," Sandra replied, her voice filled with determination. As Sandra left his office, Miguel felt a renewed sense of optimism. It was moments like these, seeing the profound changes in people like Sandra, that reminded him why this work was so important. The day of Miguel's first presentation to the UN Advisory Board arrived. As he stood at the podium, looking out over the assembled group of global leaders and business executives, he felt the weight of the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady and clear. "A decade ago, I was an undercover waiter in a luxury resort, witnessing firsthand the casual cruelty and ethical blindness that often characterized global business. Today, I stand before you as a representative of a company that has become a global leader in ethical business practices." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But I'm not here to talk about personal journeys or individual companies. I'm here to talk about the future of global business, about the urgent need for a fundamental shift in how we operate." Over the next hour, Miguel laid out a comprehensive vision for ethical business practices in the 21st century. He spoke of the challenges, technological disruption, and growing inequality, but he also highlighted the opportunities, the potential for businesses to be powerful forces for positive change in the world. As he concluded his presentation, Miguel could see that his words had made an impact. The room was buzzing with energy, with attendees eager to discuss and debate the ideas he had presented. In the days and weeks that followed, Miguel found himself at the center of a whirlwind of activity. He was constantly traveling, speaking at conferences, meeting with business leaders, and working with the UN team to develop concrete strategies for implementing ethical practices on a global scale. One particularly memorable moment came during a panel discussion at a major business forum. Miguel was sharing the stage with several other business leaders, including the CEO of a large multinational corporation known for its aggressive business tactics. As the discussion turned to the feasibility of ethical practices in highly competitive industries, the CEO leaned forward, a skeptical expression on his face. "Dr. Alvarez," he said, "while your ideas sound noble, how can you expect companies to prioritize ethics when the market rewards those who cut corners and maximize short-term profits?" Miguel met the CEO's gaze steadily. "I understand your concern," he replied. "It's a common misconception that ethical practices are at odds with profitability, but our experience at Blackwell Industries and the experiences of many other companies have shown that the opposite is true." He went on to present data showing how Blackwell's ethical initiatives had led to increased employee satisfaction and productivity, stronger customer loyalty, and access to new markets. In today's world, Miguel concluded, where consumers are increasingly conscious of corporate behavior and social media can make or break a company's reputation overnight. Ethical practices aren't just the right thing to do, they're a competitive necessity. The CEO looked thoughtful, and Miguel could see that his words had resonated not just with him, but with many others in the audience. It was another small victory in the ongoing battle to change the culture of global business. As the months passed, Miguel began to see tangible results from the UN initiative. Companies around the world were starting to adopt more ethical practices, often using the frameworks and guidelines that Miguel and his team had developed. One day, as Miguel was reviewing the latest progress report, he received a video call from Tyler. His friend's face appeared on the screen, grinning widely. "Miguel," Tyler exclaimed, "you're not going to believe this. Remember that mining company we worked with in Ghana, the one where we implemented the youth training program?" Miguel nodded, recalling the project that had been one of their early successes. "Well," Tyler continued, his excitement palpable, "they've just been recognized by the UN as a model of ethical business practices in the extractive industry. And here's the best part. Several of the young people we trained are now in leadership positions in the company." Miguel felt a surge of pride and joy. This was the kind of long-term, transformative impact they had always hoped to achieve. "That's incredible news, Tyler. It just goes to show what's possible when we commit to doing business the right way." As they continued to chat, sharing updates and brainstorming new ideas, Miguel was struck by how far they had come. From those early days of undercover work and corporate resistance to now, when their ideas were shaping global business practices. Later that week, Miguel received an invitation that brought his journey full circle. The dean of his old university in Havana was organizing a conference on ethical business practices in the developing world, and they wanted Miguel to be the keynote speaker. As he stood at the podium in the familiar lecture hall, looking out over a sea of eager young faces, Miguel felt a profound sense of completion. He had started this journey as a professor with a theory, and now he was back, able to share real-world experiences and tangible results. "When I left this university to conduct my research," Miguel began, "I had no idea where that path would lead me. I certainly never imagined that I would be standing here today, talking about how that research has helped to reshape the global business landscape." He went on to share the story of his journey from undercover waiter to corporate executive to UN advisor. But more than that, he shared his vision for the future, a future where businesses were a force for good in the world. "The challenges we face, climate change, inequality, technological disruption, they can seem overwhelming," Miguel said, his voice filled with passion. "But I've seen firsthand the power of ethical business practices to create positive change. And I believe that you, the next generation of business, even further." As he concluded his speech, the room erupted in applause. Miguel could see the excitement and determination in the students' eyes, and he felt a renewed sense of hope for the future. In the weeks that followed, Miguel found himself reflecting often on his journey. From the frustrated waiter at Sapphire Bay Resort to the respected global leader he had become, it had been an extraordinary ride. But even as he looked back, Miguel's focus remained firmly on the future. There were still so many challenges to address, so many opportunities to create positive change through ethical business practices. One morning, as Miguel sat in his office reviewing proposals for new initiatives, he received a message from Maria. Her foundation had just launched a new program to support ethical startups in developing countries, and she wanted to share the news. As he read through the details of the program, Miguel felt a familiar surge of excitement. This was the next frontier, nurturing a new generation of entrepreneurs who would build ethical practices into their businesses from the ground up. He immediately reached out to his contacts at the UN, proposing a partnership between their global initiative and Maria's foundation. The potential for impact was enormous, creating a pipeline of ethical businesses that could transform economies and communities around the world. As he worked on the proposal, Miguel's mind drifted back to that first day at Sapphire Bay Resort, when he had arrived with his hidden camera and his academic theories. He could never have imagined then where this journey would lead him. But as he looked at the world around him, at the changes that were taking root in businesses large and small, he knew that the work had been worth it. The path ahead was still long, with many challenges to overcome, but Miguel was ready to face them, armed with the knowledge, experience, and network he had built over the years. The quest for a more ethical, sustainable, and equitable business world was far from over, but with each passing day, with each new initiative and partnership, they were getting closer to making that vision a reality. And for Miguel, that was a future worth fighting for, no matter the obstacles that lay ahead. As the 15th anniversary of Miguel's undercover mission at Sapphire Bay Resort approached, the world of business had undergone a profound transformation. Ethical practices and cultural sensitivity were no longer niche concerns, but fundamental aspects of successful companies worldwide. Blackwell Industries, now a global leader in responsible business, had become a case study taught in business schools around the world. On a crisp autumn morning, Miguel found himself standing in front of a mirror, adjusting his tie. He was preparing for what might be the most important presentation of his career, a keynote address at the World Economic Forum in Davos. The theme of this year's forum was Ethical Business, the New Global Standard, and Miguel had been invited to share his journey and insights. As he made his way to the conference center, Miguel's mind wandered back to the beginning of his journey. He remembered the frustration and anger he had felt as an undercover waiter, witnessing the casual cruelty and ethical blindness of the corporate world. Those memories now felt like scenes from another life, yet they remained the driving force behind his work. The conference hall was packed when Miguel took the stage. He looked out over the sea of faces, recognizing many of the world's most influential business leaders, politicians, and activists. Among them, he spotted familiar faces: Jonathan Blackwell, Tyler, Maria, and even Sandra, all there to support him and represent the movement they had built together. 15 years ago, Miguel began, his voice steady and clear. I stood behind a bar at a luxury resort, serving drinks to corporate executives who saw the local staff and culture as nothing more than background scenery for their vacations. Today, I stand before you as living proof that change is not only possible, but essential for the future of global business. Over the next hour, Miguel took the audience on a journey through the evolution of ethical business practices. He spoke of the challenges they had faced, the resistance they had overcome, and the incredible transformations they had witnessed. He shared stories of companies that had thrived after adopting ethical practices, of communities uplifted by responsible business, and of a new generation of leaders committed to doing good while doing well. But our work is far from over, Miguel continued, his voice taking on a note of urgency. As we celebrate our progress, we must also confront the new challenges that lie ahead. Climate change, artificial intelligence, global inequality. These are issues that demand an ethical response from the business world. He went on to outline his evolution. It was a vision that went beyond corporate social responsibility or sustainability initiatives. Miguel spoke of a future where businesses were active partners in solving global challenges, where profit was not the sole measure of success, but one factor among many, including social impact, environmental stewardship, and employee well-being. As Miguel concluded his speech, the room erupted in a standing ovation. The energy in the hall was electric, with attendees eager to discuss and debate the ideas he had presented. For Miguel, it was a moment of profound satisfaction, seeing how far the conversation around ethical business had come. In the days that followed, Miguel found himself at the center of a whirlwind of activity. He participated in panel discussions, gave interviews to global media outlets, and met with business leaders eager to learn more about implementing ethical practices in their own companies. One evening, as Miguel was leaving a dinner event, he was approached by a young entrepreneur. The woman introduced herself as Amelia, and Miguel recognized her as the hospitality student he had met at Sapphire Bay Resort years ago, Dr. Alvarez. Amelia said, her eyes shining with excitement, I don't know if you remember me, but we met at Sapphire Bay about 5 years ago. I just wanted to thank you. Your work inspired me to start my own ethical tourism company, and we're now operating in 10 countries, focusing on community-based, sustainable travel experiences. Miguel felt a wave of emotion wash over him. This was why he had done it all, why he had endured the challenges and setbacks. It was for moments like this, seeing the ripple effects of their work spreading far beyond what they could have imagined. Of course I remember you, Amelia, Miguel replied warmly. I'm so glad to hear about your success. Would you be interested in partnering with Maria's Foundation. I think your experiences could be invaluable for other young entrepreneurs in the tourism industry. As they exchanged contact information and made plans to follow up, Miguel couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. The seeds they had planted over the years were not just growing, they were flourishing in ways they never could have anticipated. The next morning, Miguel received a call from Jonathan Blackwell. The CEO's voice was filled with excitement as he shared some news. Miguel, you're not going to believe this. The United Nations has just announced a new global initiative to promote ethical business practices, and they want Blackwell Industries to be a founding partner. Miguel felt a surge of pride and excitement. This was an opportunity to scale their impact even further, to help shape global business practices on an unprecedented level. That's incredible news, Jonathan. What exactly would our role be? As Blackwell outlined the details of the partnership, Miguel's mind was already racing with ideas. This initiative could be the tipping point they had been working towards, the moment when ethical business practices became the norm rather than the exception. Over the next few months, Miguel found himself traveling the world, speaking at conferences, meeting with government officials, and working with companies of all sizes to implement ethical practices. The pace was grueling, but Miguel felt energized by the progress they were making. One particularly memorable moment came during a visit to a small village in rural India. Miguel was there to see firsthand the impact of a microfinance program that Maria's Foundation had implemented in partnership with a local bank. As he walked through the village, Miguel was struck by the visible signs of positive change. New small businesses had sprung up, from a tailor shop to a small tech repair center. Children who might once have had to work to support their families were now attending school. Miguel stopped to chat with a woman who had used a microloan to start a successful vegetable stand. As she proudly showed him her thriving business and introduced him to her daughter, who was studying to become an engineer, Miguel felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This was the real-world impact of ethical business practices, changing lives and creating opportunities where none had existed before. As he prepared to leave the village, Miguel received a video call from Tyler. His friend's face appeared on the screen, grinning widely. "Miguel, guess where I am?" Miguel looked at the background behind Tyler, recognizing it immediately. "Is that Sapphire Bay Resort?" Tyler nodded, his smile widening. "It is indeed. I'm here for a conference on ethical tourism practices in the Caribbean. But that's not why I'm calling. You'll never believe who I just ran into." The camera panned to reveal a familiar face, one that brought Miguel back to the beginning of his journey. It was Derek, one of the executives who had been part of the group undercover days. Derek stepped forward, a sheepish expression on his face. "Dr. Alvarez," he began, his voice hesitant. "I don't know if you remember me, but I certainly remember you. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for how I behaved back then. Your work, your journey, it's been a wake-up call for me and for so many others in the business world." Miguel felt a complex mix of emotion, memories of those difficult days, mingling with a sense of satisfaction at how far they had come. "Thank you for saying that, Derek. I'm glad to hear that our work has had an impact." As the call ended, Miguel found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought him to this point. From a frustrated academic to an undercover waiter, from a corporate executive to a global leader in ethical business practices, it had been a path he never could have predicted. Yet as he looked at the smiling faces of the villagers around him, at the tangible signs of positive change, he knew that every challenge, every setback had been worth it. They had started a movement that was transforming the world of business, creating a ripple effect that was improving lives and communities around the globe. As Miguel prepared to head back to New York, his mind was already turning to the future. There were still so many challenges to address, so many opportunities to create positive change through ethical business practices. The fight against climate change, the need to ensure that technological advancements benefited all of society, the ongoing struggle against inequality and exploitation, these were all battles that the business world needed to be at the forefront of. But as he boarded his flight, Miguel felt a sense of optimism and determination. They had come so far, achieved so much, and he knew that with continued effort and commitment, they could go even further. The future of business was ethical, sustainable, and focused on creating value for all stakeholders, not just shareholders. And for Miguel, that was a future worth working towards, no matter the challenges that lay ahead. The journey that had begun with a simple undercover assignment had turned into a lifelong mission, one that was changing the face of global business, one ethical decision at a time. As the plane took off, giving Miguel a bird's-eye view of the lush Indian countryside, he felt ready to face whatever came next. The work was far from over, but they had built a strong foundation for the next phase of ethical business evolution. And with each passing day, with each new initiative and partnership, they were getting closer to creating a world where business was a force for good, uplifting communities, protecting the environment, and creating opportunities for all. Miguel smiled to himself as he opened his laptop, ready to start working on his next big idea. The journey continued, and he couldn't wait to see where it would lead next.